Well, how does stove, everybody?
Otis stove.
So we have a list of questions for today, but just that everyone know, we're not limited just to those questions. If anyone wants to uh, write in their own questions, or if you're a member, you can, of course, raise your hand and chime in at any point. Ain't that right?
That is correct. And it looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulty with Facebook, but we're live on YouTube. And of course, members have the Zoom access if they want to come in and interact directly. So if you'll see the links to the YouTube, and if you go there, you'll be able to ask your questions in the chat, and we'll follow that. So, did we ever figure out where we left off?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. We know we,
Oh, that's good. That's good.
yeah, uh, thanks to our dear helper, Miss Heather, always keeping us up to task and
Always
on target,
over the target, on target.
at target.
Yep, not a
I
target.
don't know.
I can't
All
remember if
right,
we're
we
supposed
ready?
to. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You guys can see my screen?
Hmm.
So,
Oh, are you recording?
me? No.
Yeah. You
Would
want to
you like me
record
to?
and, well,
I would always like to, but it seems like the last several times that I've tried, it's not giving me that option. I do see the option right now, though.
I'm going to
I
also
don't
hit
know what
record.
I don't know what changed, but I liked that I could record.
Well, when you come in, I have to make you a co-host, and then you're able to record. So,
Well, I think I remember uh even the few times, like the last few times that I was able to record, it didn't record, even though it said it was recording. So I don't know what it's recording to, because it
did it?
never. Go ahead.
So when you hit record, it'll give you a choice of going to my computer or the cloud.
It didn't.
Oh,
And also right now, like I've clicked recording, it gives no such choice.
well, okay.
Oh,
Uh,
now it did. I had to do it two times. Maybe it's like a glitch in the app,
Matrix.
but we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, yalla. So we are going to start with our uh, request from the Almighty that He protect us from the common pitfalls of approaching His word, and that is that we be careful and cautious to neither forbid what is permitted nor permit what is forbidden, not to declare what is pure that it's not pure, and not to declare what is not pure that it is. Mr. Victor, would you like to do the first line?
Yeah, I'm thinking I need to pay attention actually. I sometimes answer questions and I feel pretty sure about the answers, but I'm sitting there thinking, I need to be really careful not to say something is so when it may not be.
Yeah, even if we have a good hunch, we should be, if we're not really sure, then we should, let people know, even if, maybe there's a need to give some kind of an idea in answer to something. But if you're not sure, then at least let people know, that I'm not sure. It seems to me, we could use terminology like it seems to me instead of stating as a fact in cases that we're not sure. And if it's something that maybe we kind of have an opinion on, but we know that it's been quite a while that we've reviewed that topic or whatever it is, then it's really better, if at all possible, to abstain from expressing an opinion, if we are that uninformed, even if we used to feel more confident about it. And that's true not just with Torah, but with anything, honestly. So let's begin. Mr. Victor, Bachavov, with honor.
Yehi ratzon milfanecha,
Huh? Hard.
milfanecha, ka, uh, Hashem Elohai.
All right. And when we are praying, there's nothing wrong with saying Adonai. Absolutely nothing wrong with saying that.
Mhm.
Even when we're speaking, frankly, there's no inherent prohibition. It's a uh, pervasive and widespread practice to not say Adonai in regular speech, as a safeguard because most people would not be sufficiently cautious if we would, use it frequently in regular speech. But if you are saying Adonai in a context of reverence or teaching, and you're not just saying it, kind of in the middle of a casual conversation, then there's absolutely no issue with saying Adonai. Right? There is a rabbinic restriction on saying the name as it is actually written, but as it is actually written is not Adonai. All right, so may it be favorable before you, O eternal, my God. Mi haba, who's next?
I'll do another line.
B'chavod.
Shelo akash akashal
Right, the two dots is like elephant.
akashel
Ekashel,
bidvar halacha.
mitsuyan. So may it be your will before you, O eternal, my God, that not shall I stumble in a matter of halacha, that I shall not stumble on a point of proper application, execution of doing your commandments. All right, mi haba batur. Who's next?
אני הבאה.
יפה, כל הכבוד.
שלא אומר על טמא טהור ועל טהור טמא.
Mitsuyan. So Omar means I shall say. If you want to go ahead and translate this, it would be excellent for our viewers and also for you. Go right ahead. It's okay if you're not sure about something. I'm here to help you guys.
Is it that I should not?
Exactly. Shev is a frequent abbreviated form of asher, which means that, which, or who. So that, not.
I say
All right. So that I shall not say.
that.
All right. More commonly, this is translated in this kind of context as on or regarding, that I shouldn't say regarding or about.
Okay.
But you could say that in English.
Okay. That which is pure is impure.
All right. So tomé is impure.
Okay. That which is impure is pure.
Correct. And you notice there's nothing in between these two. Literally just says that not, I shall say, on impure, pure. So in order to make it clearer in English, it's reasonable to supply words that are kind of inferred here in the Hebrew. Hebrew is way more terse than English usually is. So don't think that Heather is just making up stuff here because there's no words. She's making it more understandable in English. So I should not say regarding what's not pure, tomé, that it is pure, tohor. All right, tamshichi, continue.
And about that which is pure, that it is impure.
Mitsuyan, excellent. All right, mihaba, you could continue if you'd like, or we could get someone else. Mashe balach, whatever you feel like.
I'll do another line.
B'chavod.
Wa'al mutar asur. Wa'al asur mutar.
Mitsuyan. Let's translate that. I'll give you a quick review. Mutar means permitted. Asur is forbidden.
And about that which is permitted, that it is forbidden.
All right. And although this is more literally, like you said, well, literally it's on, but you could translate it, it's often means like about, but here you could say nor, even though it doesn't technically mean nor, but in the context, it sounds nice in English. So just as this started with a negative, contextually, this is also saying nor about. There's like an inferred nor and not. So nor regarding, I should not say regarding what is impure that it is pure, nor regarding, go ahead.
What is permitted that it is not permitted.
Excellent.
And nor
yeah,
is that which is not permitted permitted.
Excellent. All right. Mihaba. Who is next? Mihaba. If you're a male, you would say anihaba. If you're a female, you would say anihaba'a. Anihaba'a. You guys, don't be shy. Even if you only do one word, it's worth it for your entire week to have learned the letters of one little word rather than not do anything. It's an opportunity you don't get most of the days of the week. So please take advantage. En habai shan lomed. A person who's overly bashful cannot learn. So be brave. We all
I
make
was going
mistakes here.
to see if Robert could show off some of his excellent
Come on,
Hebrew.
Robert. Come on.
Okay, I'm on my phone. Let me zoom in.
Oh, busy man.
Okay,
Right here where I highlighted.
okay. Well,
Right,
all
take your time. All right. Well, al.
akashel bidvar halacha.
Mitsuya. Excellent. All right. So, well, of course, means and. Al, and make sure you distinguish between which you did, Robert. Make sure, for people in general, that you are distinguishing between aleph, which is and ayin, which is a. So if you notice, if we pronounce the aleph and the ayin the same, then we would be pronouncing this word al exactly the same as this word al. But rather, it should be al with an aleph and al with an ayin, two completely different words. Right? So here, if we said it like an ayin mistakenly, it would be saying, and regarding something, shall I stumble, which is like almost the opposite of what it would mean. So, and not, al means not. It's like a future negation of doing something in the future. It's like the word lo, which means no, only it's a future negation, or an imperative negation, meaning don't. So here it's just future, not imperative. More times than not, though, it's imperative, like a command, don't. Right? So, and not shall I stumble in a matter of halakha. Right? So by being cautious with what we just prayed about, to not forbid what's permitted and not permit what's forbidden, and so forth. In doing so, we will not stumble in a matter of halakha. Right? Mihaba, who's next?
Nihaba.
Kol hakavod.
Waisma.
Just
Waisma.
exhale with no friction. Slightly tighten your throat, but no, there should be no friction in your mouth, in your main oral cavity. Just a slight tightening of your throat like an H.
Waismahu.
Yeah, that's it. ويسمحوا ويسمحوا.
Waismahu. Be.
Like you got something spicy in your mouth and you're exhaling loudly.
Haver,
There needs to be a sound of an exhaling.
Havaru, Havara.
Good.
I.
Haverai.
Haverai.
Right.
Yeah.
Haverai. All right, let's read it one more time. Go ahead. Read it one more time.
Waismahu be Havarai. Excuse me. Havarai.
Mitsuyan. And may they rejoice with me, my fellows, my associates, my comrades. You want to read the continuation?
Wa'al.
Break it down and take your time. Each syllable. We have 3 syllables here.
Excuse me.
Really 4. Go ahead.
Ye shalu.
Perfect. That's
Wika
perfect.
shalu.
Yeah, very good.
Ye
So
kashalu.
generally, a shava, the 2 dots that look like a colon, is a sounded shava, representing a short sound if it's preceded by a kamas vowel. Kamas is the name of the vowel that looks like a capital T, a little capital T. So normally, if you don't know any better, you should assume that a shava does not represent a short vowel sound, what we call a sounded shava. You should normally assume it does not do that. It does do it, but if you don't know any better, you should assume it doesn't. But if you see it's preceded by a qamas vowel, the T-shaped vowel, then you can assume that it should be sounded as a short, unaccented eh. All right, وآل يكشلو تمشيخ. Continue.
Havarai Bidvar Halacha.
Right,
Halacha.
and so in the same way that I shall not stumble in a matter of halacha by being cautious, and my fellows, those who are truly my friends, will rejoice with me for that. So likewise, my fellows also shall not stumble in a matter of halacha. Right? I'm not going to be causing them to stumble. وَأَسْمَحْ بُهَمْ, and I shall rejoice with them. Can you hear the song? Okay. Bonatil, we are on prohibitive miswa of the 613 everlasting conditions of God's covenant with Israel. We are on number 161. Isn't that right?
Nahon.
Yofi, excellent. So nachon means correct. Mi haba batur, who's next in line? So we're going to read, as we do every week, 13 of the 613 everlasting commandments of the covenant. Mi haba batur, who's next in line?
Ani haba'a.
Kol hakavod.
For a priest not to marry a divorcee, as Leviticus chapter 21, verse 7 states, nor may they marry a woman divorced from her husband.
Okay. Miswa haba'a.
Ani haba.
Bachavod.
For a high priest not to marry a widow, as Leviticus 21:14 states, a widow, a divorcee, a halala, or an immoral woman, these he must not marry.
Right. And a halala is a woman who is not permitted to be with a kohen. Okay. Oh, there we go. Mi haba.
Ani haba'a. For a high priest not to have sexual relations with a widow even outside the context of marriage, because by doing so he profanes her, as Leviticus chapter 21, verse 15 states, he shall not profane his progeny. This also implies that he must not cause a woman eligible to marry a priest to become ineligible, as happens through the relations described above.
Next, I want you guys to practice saying Tur Sheli. Tur is turn and Sheli is mine.
Tur Sheli.
Bachavod.
For a priest not to enter the temple with hair that has grown unseemingly long, as implied by Leviticus 10:6. Do not let your hair grow long.
Okay. Now that may be part of the historical rabbinic understanding of this commandment, but it is not what it literally says in the Hebrew. Right? And it's good to distinguish between the two, even if that is the halacha. So the term here used is paruah, and paruah, you see right here, this word really on a more literal level refers to being like wild or untamed, unkept. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's long. And usually when it's used in the Bible, it's talking about being exposed. It's an idiom. So it's an idiom that while it literally means like wild or exposed, it's usually an idiom that it is uncovered. So this would be a prohibition on a literal level, on a basic level, that the priests should not enter into the sacred temple with their heads uncovered. Okay. Anything regarding the hair being long, any prohibition of that would be an extended rabbinic interpretation on top of this. That's not the literal meaning of parua. If that would be the case, that it means that it shouldn't be long, then women would be prohibited from having long hair because classical Judaism prohibits women from having a rosh parua, a untamed head, when they go in marketplaces. And it's indisputed that that was traditionally understood as referring to the hair being covered. And nowadays, there are people who hold that, looking at the very, very literal meaning of the term being unkept, some people would say that that just meant that the woman's hair was required to be like in a ponytail or a braid if she went out in public. But I find that an extremely intellectually dishonest interpretation, given how this term is used extensively both in the Bible and in rabbinic literature. It's kind of like how it says in the book of Leviticus that one should not draw near to uncover the nakedness of certain people. And while it literally says uncover nakedness, it's indisputed from the context of how this term uncovering nakedness is used throughout the Bible and rabbinic literature, that it doesn't just mean uncovering nakedness. What it means is actual intercourse. So likewise here, the basic meaning of this idiom, parua, means uncovering, and not hair per se. If that were the case, not long hair per se. If that were the case, women could not have long hair, because our sages forbade women from having rosh parua, the same exact term, in a marketplace. So suddenly in a marketplace, she's not allowed to have long hair, but at the house she can. It doesn't make sense. I would encourage you guys to write this down, because it's one of the sort of controversial now in the modern world, where it's suddenly controversial to say anything regarding standards for women, because it's deemed in the climate of political correctness to be sexist to say anything about standards regarding women if you are not a woman. And of course, similar rules do not apply to men. If you're a woman, you're absolutely permitted to give any criticism of a man, and that's totally legitimate, without question. And you're a bigot for ever asking a question about it. Of course, I'm being sarcastic, but while men should certainly take into account the voices of women, and women should express their experiences and their opinions, right? This is not to say that they shouldn't, but the idea that a person who is studying Torah cannot give an educated opinion regarding the standards for women in the context of Torah, that they cannot do so just because they are a male, is not a concept within Torah Judaism, classical Torah Judaism. It may be in certain modern sects that have broken off of classical Judaism, but it is not part of Torah. In Torah, we have no restriction on teaching God's commandments and the instructions of our sages as they apply to anyone. There's no restriction. If you're a woman, you can quote the halachot as they apply to men. If you're a man, you can quote halacha as it applies to women, and so forth. All right.
Before you go off to the next one,
Yes, sir.
how is that misunderstood by Jewish communities today?
You mean this term?
How would you how would you practically see that misapplied?
The way let me take off the share. So the way that they do it is, and number one, they're coming with, it's invariably coming with either an internal, within the person themselves, sort of a drive to make Judaism or Jewish tradition in harmony with modern norms or modern sensibilities of liberation, like feminism, to be frank. And it's not just with this. Usually the same people who do this will do a similar thing with other things. Instead of asking how Torah applies to the modern world And of course, sometimes there are new situations where there's a legitimate question because our sages didn't deal with like the internet and other things.
Sure.
But if we're talking about things that have not changed, and that our sages were very clear about, it's a little bit different than when you're talking about things that have clearly changed, like medical advancements and such. So the way they do that is, number one, they're not coming to this question originally. Their starting point is not the writings of our sages leading to this ambiguity, right? But rather it's because they either elevate typically leftist opinions equal to the Torah or higher to the Torah. And it's not always that they're leftists. There are like politically conservative Jews who do the same thing just because perhaps the wife doesn't want to feel like she has to cover her hair, to be frank. It's perfectly fine to say you don't want to cover your hair. I mean, I do many things, seriously, many things that is not in my nature to do, but I do them. And this is the case with virtually all the commandments except for the three big ones, idolatry, forbidden intercourse, and murder. If there is a commandment, whether rabbinic or from the Torah, that causes you serious harm. So let's say a woman, if she covers her hair, this would be an exceptional case. So you would be accountable before God regarding the integrity of your heart, right? It's not up for me to judge the integrity of your heart. But if covering your hair would cause you serious psychological damage or perhaps real depression, which it could for some people, then you would be exempt, right? And we are not advocates, Jews traditionally are not advocates of like the insane, how do I say, standards of certain societies today where invariably they hold all people to absolutely the same standard. And if a woman takes off her hair covering, like she should be attacked, and whether in public or by a court. No, people have different situations. So how else do they do it? Starting with the starting point that modern norms are either equally legitimate to Jewish tradition of Torah observance or superior to it. And so they try to conform Torah to the modern conventions rather than vice versa. Once they start off with that, then they start trying to find some way to justify it from rabbinic literature. And what they do is they will point to a few places in the Talmud, as far as I know, I've only seen examples in the Talmud Bavli. I've never gone through the Jerusalem Talmud to see if there are examples there. But there are a few examples in the Talmud Bavli and the Babylonian Talmud where it's clear that there is a woman whose hair is not covered and it doesn't seem like it's a big deal. So they'll say, see, like there was no issue in this one instance while ignoring a plethora of other examples. And that's usually not the most consistent way to approach a text about any topic. If you have a norm, a standard that is very clear, whether it's 20 examples or 100 examples, and then you find one or two that seem to be saying something different or contradictory, number one, you could assume that consider the possibility that maybe it's a different opinion, because in the Talmud you have different opinions, and that would be an exceptional opinion. Or you could say that perhaps this is an exceptional scenario and try to be careful in your reading of that account and see how that scenario may be different from all these other references. But typically what you want to do regarding anything, whether in the Bible, rabbinic literature, or in any text, is you try to understand on the outset the anomaly or the exception to the rule in light of the rule and not vice versa. You don't take the exception to the rule and try to apply it to everything else.
Makes sense.
The one example I'm recalling is at a wedding. There was a wedding celebration recorded in the Talmud, and this woman was a young lady. I don't even remember if she's officially married yet or not. It may be at the celebration, but she's not yet married, or maybe she is. I don't remember exactly. But it makes it clear in the Talmud that her hair is not covered. So from the opinion, which is not the historical opinion among Middle Eastern Jews, from the opinion that is now mainstream, that unmarried women are not required to cover their hair, then you could say, okay, because she had not been married up to this point, and we're not going to be strict with her that just as soon as they complete the Kiddushin ceremony in front of the witnesses, that now she immediately is going to be required to cover her hair, whereas just a moment before she wasn't. But perhaps we're lenient about that, and we will say we can wait until she goes home and finds whatever garment she's going to use to cover her hair, and she's going out in the marketplace. So from then on, but here, no big deal. You see what I'm saying? There's a way you could understand that. The other way, which I think is also pretty clear in that context, is that the context is not in the middle of a marketplace. And the wording of our sages in the Mishnah is that a woman is obligated to cover her hair. Well, it doesn't say it in a proactive sense. It says they're forbidden, they're not to go out into a marketplace. It says not to.
So into public, not necessarily private ceremony or private setting.
Correct. So although the mainstream in the Orthodox world, at least the more traditional streams of the Orthodox world, is that women cover their hair if they're married, even like in their own home if there are guests around. But there is no halakha from the source text that require that. That's a standard they've taken upon themselves. But there is a very, very clear halakha in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, and it's brought in the Mishneh Torah. It's also in the Shulchan Aruch, that whether she is married or single, right? Whether she's married or single, that a woman is not, a daughter of Israel is not to go into the marketplace with her head uncovered. And it uses the same exact terminology as we have here for the Kohen.
I recall a Zoom meeting with someone in Israel, and the wife was getting on, and she had to go get a hair covering middle of the day. She had let me go cover my head before she came in, and that makes sense. The only other scenario that, being that we're talking about having a head uncovered or hair uncovered, is what about a bald man who has no hair?
You're talking about if he's a Kohen, you're asking, right?
Well, yeah, I guess I am.
Yeah. First, tell me exactly what you're referring to, because the mitzvah we're looking at right now is about Kohanim. So I'm not sure what you're.
The practical application of people covering their hair, kind of based on this, covering their head, the women, the men, that kind of thing. But if you're bald, it's
not just about
breaking
the hair.
Well,
if we really
that's what
look
we were
at
saying is hair. So I'm like, okay.
Yeah, if you really look at it, neither here in this commandment that we just looked at from the Torah, nor in the rabbinic prohibition or restriction of daughters of Israel going into the marketplace, in neither case does it refer to hair. It's head.
Okay.
Head. And part of the idea behind this is that it's not just that you have a little tiny thing on your head, just symbolic, but at least this is the most liberal understanding of it. At least the majority of the hair of the head is covered, right? It's not that if you just have 2 or 3 little hairs right here and you cover, like if a woman, God forbid, she has almost no hair and just a little patch here, that all she has to do is, with a Coca-Cola bottle cap, just put that. No, it's talking about the head. It's not just about covering the hair. It's also an act of humility and modesty. And every Jew, according to rabbinic institution, is to cover their head, same terminology, when we pray, at least when we're praying the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei. It's not that you cannot or should not pray if you don't happen to have a hat on hand or something like that. If you don't have a hat or a talit to cover yourself, you can still pray. But you're supposed to do what you can to cover your head before you pray.
Kind of the opposite of what many people coming out of the church, they go to prayer and they rip that hat off, and I'm thinking it's the other way. Okay.
That's not exactly the practice of Israel. And it's associated with shame or not always shame, but disrespect. And there's some examples of that in the Bible as well, where even though there's not an explicit commandment for everyone to cover their head all the time, but there are some examples where you can see that culturally, in the culture of ancient Israel, going out and about with your head uncovered was considered less respectful. That may have depended on your position in society as well, but it didn't become a strict requirement beyond just a cultural thing until much more recent. And it's not a requirement to always be covering your head as a guy. It's not a requirement from our sages, right? This is a much more recent restriction that communities took upon themselves voluntarily. Now it's not so voluntary in their perception. They think it's an absolute requirement, but originally, just a few generations ago, really, it was voluntarily taken upon in different communities. Yalla, bo'u namshich. So Rosh Perua, right? Perua does not mean have long hair. It means literally unkept or wild, and it's a Hebrew idiom for covering the head. Miswaha ba'a. Next commandment, Miswaha ba'a mihaba. Who's next?
Dur shali. For a priest not to enter the temple with torn garments, as implied by the same passage in Leviticus, do not rend your garments.
All right.
Ursheli.
Okay.
For a priest not to leave the temple courtyard in the midst of service, as implied by Leviticus 10:7, do not depart from before the entrance to the tent of testimony.
Miswaha ba'a.
For a common priest not to become impure through contact with a corpse, with the exception of the specific instances permitted by the Torah, as Leviticus chapter 21, verse 1 states, he shall not become impure through contact with the dead.
Miswaha ba'a mihaba batur. Who's next in line?
Anihaba.
Okay.
For a high priest not to become impure through contact with any corpse, even those of his relatives, as Leviticus 21:11 states, he shall not become impure even for his father and mother.
Right? That's only with the high priest. With regular priests, you certainly could become impure for your father and mother. Miswaha ba'a.
For a high priest not to enter the place where a corpse is found, as Leviticus chapter 21, verse 11 states, he should not come in contact with any dead body. According to the oral tradition, we have learned that he is obligated, for violating both prohibitions, not to become impure and not to enter the place of a corpse.
A better translation here would be liable rather than obligated. The word translated as obligated here, hayav, it often means, or should be understood in English at least, as liable, but it can mean obligated depending on context. But it just doesn't make sense here. He's
Obligated
liable.
to be punished, I think, is
Yeah, but
kind of more
it
like
sounds more in normal English. We would say liable.
right. And that would make some people scratch their heads. So liable means that you're liable for punishment.
Correct.
Yeah. For the tribe of Levi not to take a portion of Eretz Israel, as Deuteronomy Eretz Israel, as Deuteronomy 18:2 states, he shall not receive an inheritance.
Accent on the first syllable. Eretz.
For the tribe of Levi not to take a portion of the spoils in the conquest of Eretz Israel, as Deuteronomy 18:1 states, the priests and the Levites shall not receive a portion or an inheritance.
Not to tear out hair in mourning for the dead. Deuteronomy 14:1 states, do not make a bald spot upon your heads.
Okay, now in the Hebrew here, it literally says you should not place a balding, right? Meaning you shouldn't make yourself bald. It literally says you shouldn't place a balding between your eyes for the dead. So I would not say this is false. It's not wrong. It's just not so literal, and I'm pointing this out for a significant reason. the same terminology is used where it says, and they shall be frontlets between your eyes, or tefillin between your eyes. And some, how do we say this? What do you call a person who likes to stir up things or just be a contrarian? I think is what I'm trying to think of.
I think
There are
people
some
just point to me when they think of that kind of person. Pot stirrer, stirs the pot.
Yes. So there are some people who try to say, well, why don't you wear the tefillin like literally between your eyes, like right on the top
Right
of your
here.
nose? And there are some people who even do that. Although there's
Instigator.
yes, yes. Although like if you're gonna just make up your own thing, why even have tefillin? Just do like the Karaites do and just say, I think it's symbolic. But don't take it in our tradition and then just completely throw out the window what it means in rabbinic tradition. But when they will do this, they will try to justify it, saying that they're doing the right thing and we're doing the wrong thing, that classical Jewish tradition is wrong, because the verse says you should place it as frontlets between your eyes. And we're placing it between our eyes, above our eyes, whereas they want to put it between their eyes, like right in between their eyes. What this verse here shows is that the terminology between the eyes, its precedent in the Torah, is between the eyes at the hairline, not between the eyes, actually between the eyes. Unless we think that the overwhelming majority of ancient Israelites had unibrows. I'm sure some of them did, it's the Middle East, but it was not the majority, I assure you. Certainly not of the women. And this prohibition isn't only on men, it's on men and women alike. So this is a good example of showing that between the eyes does not have to mean like right there between your eyes. And frankly, the eyebrows are not perfectly between the eyes either. So I don't know many people who have a unibrow that extends down onto their nose like that. It's the hairline. All right. You guys understand what I'm referring to here?
I understand that it goes higher up.
That the
as far as
terminology between the eyes can refer to higher up than literally
yeah,
between the
to
eyes.
me it means centered, not over here on
Yes,
the
that's
side, not on the back.
correct.
Like turning the
Correct.
ball cap backwards kind of a thing. We
Correct.
don't do that with tefillin.
Correct. All right. Miss Wahaba.
Not to eat
Go ahead.
not to eat non-kosher animals, as Deuteronomy chapter 14:7 states. Nevertheless, among those who chew the cud, these you may not eat.
And finally, Miswaha Aharona. Aharon means final. You can remember that like Aaron, Aharon in Hebrew, only it's with the het, Aharon. He was the brother of the final prophet, the final indisputable legislator, right? Who is Moses. So he is Aharon. Miswa Aharona, final Miswa.
Not to eat non-kosher fish, as Leviticus 11:11 states, they shall be regarded as detestable thing for you. Do not eat of their flesh.
All right, Kolakavud. So before we continue,
That's pretty hard
any
down in
questions?
Louisiana, isn't it?
No, because we
You
have
can get it done.
you can get any kind of fish here. There's water everywhere. I mean, yeah, at the fish boil, what do they call them? Well, I can't.
Crawfish boils and
Yeah,
stuff.
crawfish boils, or like there's fish fry. Is that what they call it? I forget what it is called.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't just assume it's going to be kosher fish. Catfish is a big thing.
Oh,
But there's
no.
plenty of kosher fish though.
Yeah, I know.
Plenty
I
of.
was teasing.
Any
There's plenty of non-kosher fish, I think is the point down there.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
So any questions before we move on to Sefer HaMiswoth? Any questions regarding what we read? Okay, in that case, Bo'u Namshich. We're going now to Sefer HaMiswoth, the Book of Commandments. This is different from what we were just looking at, in that what we were just looking at is a 1 or 2 sentence summary of each of the 613 commandments. But here we have, instead of 1 or 2 sentences, we get 1 or 2 paragraphs, right? So it's a bit more of an expounded explanation. Still not what we call decisive halakha, because it's not elaborating on each detail to its fullest extent, but it's an expanded summary. All right. So according to our glorious secretary, Heather, we stopped at the proactive commandment number 33. So today we are on proactive commandment 34 of Sefer HaMitzvot, the Book of Commandments. Mihaba. If we have anyone who has not read yet, please feel free to read. Bachavov. Go right ahead.
That is the let me start over. That is that he commanded the priest to carry the ark on their shoulders when we want to move it from place to place. And that is saying they bore on it on their shoulders. Even though this command came to the Levites at that time, that was in fact because of the paucity.
Yeah, I love it when translators use words that are extremely rare. Honestly, I don't like it. It's horrible. Why do they do that? So I'm going to look it up for us real fast. What is paucity?
At the time.
Anyone, before we move on, do you mind if we look this up?
Yeah, that's fine.
Why read it if we don't know what it means? Paucity. Okay, so it's a very rare English word for scarcity or shortage.
Okay. A priest who were actually obligated with the commandment. If so, the commandment is obligatory on the priest, and they should be the ones to carry it, as it is explained in the book of Joshua 3:6, and in the book of Samuel, 2 Samuel 15:25. And when David commanded that the ark carry the second time, he said in Chronicles 15:15, the sons of Levi carried the ark of God by means of poles in their shoulders, as Moshe had commanded, in accordance with the words of the Lord. And likewise, when he mentions the division of the priest into 24 watches in Chronicles, it states in 1 Chronicles 24:19, according to the allocation of offices by tasks, they were to enter the house of the Lord according to the ordinance given to Aharon, but their father, as the Lord God of Israel had commanded him. The
And
sages.
these are allusions to oral Torah, by the way. Right there, and not only this, there are several passages throughout the Hebrew Bible that refer back to God commanding certain things or other laws that were regarded as laws that we don't find explicit in the Torah. Right? There may be allusions to them, but they're not explicit. This is the concept of the oral law, oral traditional understandings of what the commandment, how the commandment was understood by the sages of Israel.
Yeah. The sages may their memory be blessed, explain in their hints to the service of the priest being to carry the ark on their shoulder. That is what is meant by, as the Lord God of Israel had commanded him. In the language of Sifri is according to the audience, etc.
Or ordinance.
Ordinance. According to the ordinance, etc., as the Lord had commanded him. Where did he command him? By the son of Kehat. He did not give any, since theirs was the service of the most sacred objects they bore on their shoulders. Behold, it has been made clear to you that this commandment is included in the commandments. See Peshat Naso, Mishneh Torah vessels in the sanctuary of the sanctuary and those who serve therein.
Mitsuyan, Tizkur Lamisworth. Good job. Right. So, let the games begin.
Emmanuel, you got a question? You start us off?
Oh, a question about what we read
Anything?
or
No.
anything?
Yeah, it's Q&A today.
Oh, I always have questions, guys. So,
Well, raise your hand when you're ready, unless you have
You
one.
should make your avatar a big question mark.
I
He
should.
asks good questions. I have
I'll wait.
I have a question from Israel. Nice Jewish man over there. kind of watching what's going on in his country. He says, are Christian Zionists more Jewish than liberal anti-Israel Jews?
Hmm.
Ouch.
I have no hesitation to say what I'm going to say.
Good.
I don't know that I should say it.
Okay.
That's hesitation. Okay. So depending on what you mean by Jewish. So that there
Yeah.
is a bit of a term, a bit of a conundrum with the term Jewish, and that is that it can be used in more than one way. People mean different things when they say it. That's nothing
Let's
unique.
say brothers of Israel or comrades maybe might be
Okay.
a better way of
So
looking at it.
yeah, I'll explain what I mean and what I don't mean.
Yeah.
But we should not think it's just this word. There are many, many words in every language that have different connotations, right? But so the term Jewish usually, okay, so in its earliest meaning, didn't even refer to the tribe of Judah, as many people think. We see in the book of Genesis that even aside from the tribe of Judah, before Judah was named, that I believe it was the daughter of Esau or his wife, I forget exactly which, but he married a woman or he had a daughter named Yehudith. This is the female form of Yehudah. So we know that this name already existed. The basic meaning of this is one that is praised, right? So like here it's just a feminized form of that, the one that is praised. So that's the first meaning. And in this meaning, in a more literal meaning, you can say that anyone who praises the one true God and acknowledges him is Jewish, right? But that's in the most literal sense. Then you have the tribal sense. Then you have the national sense, in the sense of the two divided kingdoms of Israel, and those of the southern kingdom, regardless of what tribe of Israel they were called Jewish because they belonged to the kingdom of Judah. And that's the case as we will find in the book of Esther, as Purim, when Purim arrives, we'll see this. Mordechai, even though he's a Benjaminite from the tribe of Benjamin, he's called a Yehudi, right? A Jew. So that's a third understanding or connotation. Now, later on, when the northern kingdom of Israel disappeared, right, then it no longer just meant that you associated with the southern kingdom of Israel. It came to also mean that you're just an Israelite in general. It became synonymous essentially with like any faithful of the people of Israel started to be called Jewish, and so then it's being used in the sense of one who is bound by the covenant of Israel, one who formally is associated with the people of Israel. So with that question, if you mean, does it mean that they are, truly a part of the bound to the covenant of Israel? No. Even if they're Zionist, even if they are best comrades, even if they believe in one God and theologically they agree with us, but they haven't taken upon themselves the fullness of the covenant, they're not more Jewish than an anti-Zionist Jew. The anti-Zionist Jew is obligated in the covenant, even if he's violating it. And the Zionist Christian, even though he's more praiseworthy for sure, and in this sense, you could say he's more Jewish, but in the covenantal sense, he's not Jewish. But I could say ideologically, a Christian Zionist is more Jewish than an anti-Zionist Jew, right? And I say Jew because yes, he's liable to the covenant, but his ideology and his behavior, in this case would be antithetical to the covenant. It's antithetical to being Jewish. It's no different how a person can technically be an American while doing very un-American things and identifying with anti-American ideology. So it's not that they're no longer an American, but their being an American is kind of insignificant other than with regard to their being culpable to American law. That's it. Right? And that's so really the Zionist Christian is certainly the more praiseworthy of the two, without a question. And I would encourage that Christian Zionist to go all the way and become a Zionist to the fullest sense, in the sense of joining the people of Israel. Baruch haba. You are most welcome. So, sha'elah haba. Sha'elah is question. We'll write that down. If you continue, let's learn this word sha'elah. and say this before you give a new question. Sha'elah. Sha'elah means question. I wrote down a transliteration in the chat box if you guys want to quote it. So before you give a new question, you'll say Sha'elah haba'ah, next question, or next question. Sha'elah haba'ah. A sha'elah is a question.
Kind
Yalla,
of tying
Go ahead.
into what you were just talking about. We had a question on our list from Yosef on Facebook who said, why have the people allowed the world to name them a Jew? Nobody knows who you are.
If I remember, that was even longer than just that. So let's first answer that first part. When people begin to be called something of any group anywhere in the world, it's not really a question of being allowed or not allowing. People, especially if they are, especially if you know, if they don't respect you, they're going to call you whatever they want to call you. You know, it's outside of your power. If you mean perhaps why do we now call ourselves Jews? Well, there's nothing wrong with the term Jewish. It's a great word. You know, even if we don't belong to the tribe of Judah technically, and though many Jews for sure do belong to the tribe of Judah, but even if you don't, it's still a great term, and it's not a misuse of the term. It's completely normal in all languages that words can take on new meaning, can mean different things in different contexts. So there's, you know, a word like Jew, which in Hebrew is Yehudi, which is one who's either one who is praised or praiseworthy, or one who's associated with the one who is praiseworthy, and that's the connotation here because the term was given to Judah, son of Jacob, with his name being a reference to God, right? It says that his mother praised God and then named him this, and there was a word play in the Hebrew because she praised God, Hoda Lashem, so she named him Yehuda, referring to the one who is to be praised. So he who should be praised is not a reference to Judah, but rather his name Judah is a praise to God, saying he, i.e. God, he is to be praised. Right? So why would I not like this term? Why should I be ashamed of that term? If it was a truly negative term, yeah, I wouldn't like it. But this is a wonderful term. It's a shame on them if they think it's a pejorative, you know? Yes,
Well,
sir.
shame on them for using it as such, and
Correct.
Ignorant, obviously, but you know, using it as a derogatory term.
They're making a fool of themselves. Yeah. All right. Sha'elah haba'ah. I think that was a longer question, if I recall.
No, that one was just short.
Okay. All right. So let's say Sha'elah haba'ah. Next question, Sha'elah haba'ah.
Sha'elah haba'ah. So I had a question from our Purim teachings. What
Okay.
if you live in an area where there aren't any other Jews? Should you try to find a way to have something delivered to them, to a Jew in a different place?
Yeah.
For the
Yeah.
food, or can
Yeah,
you?
definitely. Or can you give it to someone who is not Jewish? Yeah, you can give it to someone who's not Jewish. But it would be proper to send something to people who are Jewish, who are joining with you in that celebration. And I have no doubt that there are opinions that that's the only way you can fulfill the obligation. But if I remember correctly, and we recently went through these halachot, it doesn't specify that they have to be halachically Jewish.
Okay.
Sha'elah haba'ah.
Allah
Sha'elah. Oh,
Yes.
Go ahead,
You guys rock.
Emmanuel.
mine is switching gears a little bit, going to kashrut. I know most milk, when you go to the grocery store, has the kosher symbols, most of them. But when it comes down to cheese, that is not the case.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
And I have not been able to find much resources about cheese.
Okay. So the mainstream opinion in the Orthodox world today is that cheese needs a hechsher. And I understand where they're coming from. The main concern is that the catalyst for the curding of the milk to create the cheese is from an unkosher animal. And even if it's a kosher animal, it's mixing milk with dairy. There is more to this concept than just that, however, and we will get too bogged down on details if we go too much into depth on it. But suffice it to say, there are opinions that are based on historical Jewish sources, and I don't mean just from a few hundred years ago, but from the words of some of the Gaonim. These are the leaders of the people of Israel in the era immediately after the close of the Talmud. So they make certain statements that would permit the majority of cheeses in the United States, at least. But I encourage you to look at the videos of Rabbi Chaim Ovadia on this topic. And you also check out the videos of Rabbi Yonatan Halevi. These two excellent rabbis do not see eye to eye on every detail, but both of them will give you a much greater understanding of these concepts, and they will explain it with terminology that you're more likely to understand than you may find from other Orthodox sources or rabbis online, who, not that they're wrong per se, but that tend to use too much Hebrew and Aramaic jargon in their explanations, and it may just be too confusing. So again, we can write these in the chat box. Check out the videos on the laws of kashrut, kosher laws, from Rabbi Chaim Ovadia and Rabbi Yonatan Halevi. Rabbi Yonatan Halevi also has a book regarding this topic specifically of kashrut in general that I really encourage you guys to read. Right? So maybe we can get someone to write.
I read that book and it's really useful, but I don't think he touches much on cheese.
Okay, well, Rabbi Chaim Ovadia definitely has videos on these topics.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Right, on YouTube, you bet.
In my stores locally, most of the stores do not carry any kosher cheese except for Cabot, I think is the
Let's
only
be
one.
careful to say kosher certified.
Yeah.
Just because something's not with a certification doesn't mean it's not kosher.
And there are Jews that won't eat it unless it's even higher standard.
Yeah, there are Jews who
milked
eat
by Jews and
correct,
etc.
correct,
yeah.
correct.
So that's there's different levels of that. But if you're looking for a symbol, check your Cabot, CABOT, hard cheeses. Go ahead.
I think it's also very important to mention here that my mom has insisted for years and years that the first word I ever uttered was cheese.
More cheese. Second
Want
word.
cheese is exactly how she puts it. Want cheese? That was my first. Want
That's
cheese.
funny.
It is fun. It's kind of terrible, you know. Before you say mom or dad, yalla.
Yeah.
I just viewed my parents as a source of cheese. Like that's oh Lord.
Sha'Allah I think you kind of touched on it, but in the YouTube chat, from what understanding, calling all Israel Jews happened during the Babylonian exile.
What understanding? Well,
yeah,
because at that point the northern kingdom had already dissipated, so those who remained were affiliated with the kingdom of Judah. That was the remnant of those who identified with Israel. Bar the Samaritans, perhaps. We don't, it's kind of speculative what exactly went on with that, the origins of the Samaritans. That's a whole different topic. But without a doubt, though, the Samaritans, who are still a living community, though they are endangered in their numbers, they're only about 1,000. But there is no doubt that regardless of the controversies or disputes about their origins, that they have a truly ancient connection to the historical people of Israel. It's not like certain other groups that just pop up and kind of claim to be Israel without any shred of legitimacy. So the Samaritans, whether or not we say they're halachically Jewish, whether or not that is one's opinion, it is indisputable that they have connections to the ancient people of Israel. And we should treat them with respect, even if you don't think they're halakhically Jewish. But the term Jew came to be associated with the people of Israel because, Samaritans aside, the majority population were associated with the kingdom of Judah, which was the remaining kingdom there. Thank you, Heather, for finding that link. Kol hakavod. So Heather has provided a link regarding the question on non-kosher certified. Let's be careful to distinguish between saying something is not kosher and saying it's not kosher certified or not certified kosher.
I just
Yes,
took
ma'am.
that from his video title, which the
Okay.
whole title is non-kosher cheese.
Yeah, it's good that
there almost is no such thing or something like that.
Yeah. There is a thing when you're making titles on YouTube or anything in social media, you have to be as terse as you can. Otherwise, people aren't going to read the whole thing. All right, Sha'elah haba'ah. I want you guys to repeat that. When you say next question, say Sha'elah haba'ah. We don't have to do this for all time in the future. This is just until we get that word instilled in us.
Sha'elah haba'ah. Mike on Facebook asked, why does it cost so much to live a Jewish life? How do people afford it?
I don't like to answer this question because it shows the humanity in the not best sense of the Jewish people. Although this is not the fault of the Jewish people as a whole, but more so of the leadership of small sectors of the Jewish people who have a disproportionate amount of influence on the Jewish people. So the real reason is because I would say it's twofold. There has been a trend, a reactionary trend after the Enlightenment period that occurred a few centuries ago, where in the way that there were certain sectors of the Jewish people who, when for the first time in history, were granted extra liberties that they had not had for all their time in Europe. Suddenly, in Europe specifically, they were granted certain liberties, and they used that as an opportunity to take upon themselves a more non-Jewish type life or lifestyle. So when that started happening, the more traditional Jewish community, at least a major part of it, went the opposite direction. So that whereas historically and traditionally Jews were certainly traditional, right? Certainly cared about the Torah and the fundamentals of the Torah, but were much more practical in many ways. However, when some of the leaders of the traditional Jewish world saw that a growing number of Jews were assimilating and dropping, not just a few stringencies, but were dropping a lot of major elements of Jewish identity. So they went the opposite direction and began pushing, I don't want to say extreme, but relative to what used to be the norm, extreme practices and stringencies in a number of different areas. So that's one of the ways in which being Jewish started to become more expensive, because some of these great stringencies that used to not be the norm cost extra money, require greater expertise in different things that used to not be necessary. You used to be able to do the same thing, but without such a high degree of required expertise that would necessitate having someone whose entire life is focused on doing that particular thing. Example is shechita, ritual slaughter. It used to be not unusual that regular Jews would just slaughter for themselves. Nowadays, even if you've learned the laws of shechita, but you're not like a full-time slaughterer, if you slaughter for yourself, even if you know the laws and you've had a full-time slaughterer oversee you and give you permission to slaughter, even so, you're still going to be viewed as doing something rebellious in the ultra-Orthodox establishment. That's what it is now, because it's not your full-time practice, so who are you to be doing this, right? So this is a consequence of that polarization that has occurred following the Enlightenment period. And that's just one example. There's several examples, several. And the other is that because different aspects of Torah observance have become so extreme, like the slaughter, like scribal writing, the nuances of writing letters used to not be so strict as it is now. And we're talking about even just a few centuries ago, wasn't as strict as it is now. So what that has caused is that you basically have to make it your full-time occupation, or at least, your part-time occupation. And so now it has come to be that many scholars, many rabbinic leaders have this as one of their main sources of income. So now it's not only a matter of a reactionary, movement of stringency as a precaution to protect the Jewish people, to maintain observance among the Jewish people, which that is part of it. But it's also now a matter of certain people feeling threatened if you can legitimately do the same thing, even though it's not your full-time occupation. So if the average Jew will feel emboldened to slaughter their own meat, even though it's not their full-time occupation, this would basically put certain leaders of the Jewish world out of business. And when I say Jewish world without qualifying it, I'm usually referring to the Orthodox establishment, right? Which really is not the majority of the Jewish world. But what I mean typically, unless I'm qualifying that statement, is the religious Jewish world. So it would be much less expensive to live a Torah observant lifestyle if these different fields of Jewish life were not so centralized into certain individuals or certain expertise, but rather if they were back the way they used to be for the overwhelming majority of Jewish history, it would become much less expensive. It's just like any other product. When the source for it becomes very limited, but the demand is very high, then the prices are going to rise. But if there's a big demand for it and it's not that rare, it's not that difficult to get a hold of it, then the prices drop. So if you are willing to learn how to slaughter, or willing to eat the slaughter of someone who knows these halachot and has been authorized by a qualified slaughterer to slaughter, if you're willing to eat their slaughter, even though that is not their full-time job, well, then suddenly, this is again just an example, suddenly it's no longer going to be so expensive to live a Torah observant life. What I most encourage you guys to do, especially if you have a stomach for it, not everybody does, is just learn the laws of ritual slaughter and start doing it. Right? Not everybody is going to eat from your meat, but you could at least do it for your own family.
Right. I actually had a rabbi who's a shahita. How you say it? Shohet.
The concept is shahita, and the one who does it is associated with doing is a shohet. Right. Go ahead.
All right. He encouraged me on, because I was telling him I raised sheep, and he offered to come and do it for me, but he also I said, well, can I do it? And he encouraged me to do that. I could do it for myself. I obviously would not do it for him. I could not do it for him, or pretty much the Jewish community in general. But he said it was a very good mitzvah to learn how to properly slaughter. And I agree that we if you have animals, slaughter them correctly, obviously. I think the only tricky part is going to be, and I'm not sure how that plays out outside the land. I would imagine it's just like inside the land with the temple, is that there are aspects of the sheep that cannot be eaten.
You mean parts? Yeah, there are parts.
Yeah, parts that are usually the meat can be, but things have to be removed properly in order for that meat to be acceptable.
Information is so readily available today. You can learn this stuff. You don't have. It's not like getting a degree. Seriously.
Even the sciatic nerve removal.
Even the sciatic nerve removal. If you're concerned about that, then just don't eat that area.
Right. That's
It's not a
usually
big deal.
what you do. Like I would sell off the back
Yeah,
half
take that
to
area
someone
and
else.
set,
Yeah.
yeah. It's not
Yeah.
that big of a deal.
Yeah. Now, Robert brought up about people, they would teach the Amish to do the slaughter, which, again, that's not a Jewish person doing it. I think you should probably do your own if you can. But
Of course.
uh,
And yeah, it's
yeah,
better to
they
not.
do not slaughter it correctly. I'll just say that. They will allow me to, like, I can take it to a butcher and say, I want this done and I want that prepared this way, but I slaughter it, and I'm probably a little bit
You
better
also, you
there,
know,
but
just so that nobody will say we didn't mention it. Of course, you also need to recognize the basic uh, ways of identifying whether there are lesions in the lungs,
mm,
um, for example, that would make it unkosher, even if it's a kosher species. But if it has certain types of lesions, it can render it unkosher. You could still profit from that animal, even if you can't eat
mhm,
it. You can sell it to someone who's not an Israelite.
a lot.
But these things are not, it's not such a big deal to learn, right? We just
Yeah,
need to stop being afraid to learn and stop being afraid to do things. You don't have to have the whole world agree with what you're going to do in order to do the right thing. In fact, more times than not in history, uh, doing the right thing means that people are going to oppose you.
oh,
Right?
for sure. That certainly explained a lot, the way you were saying that the community is set up in a way that it's not going to be friendly to you're doing it,
Yeah. And you know, they
on your
also
own.
don't have to know. They don't have to
Right.
know. But you
Yeah.
do need to, before you're slaughtering for other people, you need to slaughter under the supervision of a qualified slaughterer who will give you permission to slaughter for other people,
Mm.
right? But you can slaughter for yourself without having been given permission, as long as you know the laws. And you're not violating the Torah by doing so.
Hmm.
Yalla. Also, if you're not officially an Israelite yet, if you haven't officially joined the people of Israel, you don't have to be as strict on these things. Definitely eat
Yeah,
properly slaughtered food, but you don't have to be worried about the minutia to the extent that you would if you've formally entered the covenant.
very true. The
Yalla.
ra yeah, the rabbi was clear on that as well, is that it was fine, and that it was an improvement on eating meat, was for me to slaughter my own,
I
even though I
definitely,
wasn't Jewish. Yeah.
definitely.
Kind of in that same neighborhood, I got a question from Sal on Facebook. And I added a backup question, or a follow-up, but can a Noahide practice Buddhism?
Uh,
And then my follow-up was, can a Christian be a Noahide?
well, these are great questions.
Okay.
Very good questions. Well, it's very easy to give an absolute yes or an absolute no question. Um, let's start off with this. Even if they could, even if a Noahide could be Buddhist, I think the bigger question is that the proper path? And that I would say absolutely not. Absolutely not. How the sort of gray area in it is that there are different types of Buddhism, right? The same is true with Christianity, Islam, and not all types have the same issues as far as their compatibility with Torah. So there are types of Buddhism that do not involve serving idols, and that would be the biggest violation of the laws of Noah. But even just regarding being a Noahide, let me just put it out there. This is not a denial that they exist as a legitimate um, standard within the context of classical Torah observance, right? There is such a thing as the laws of Noah in classical Jewish sources. It's not like a modern made up thing. However, the way it's being promoted and the way it's being expounded upon currently in a popularized way is a modern innovation. The way it's being promoted as an ideal is a modern innovation, largely to sort of evade responsibility of teaching non-Jews how to become Jewish. Right? More times than not, people who seriously take the laws of Noah and try to seriously apply them, more times than not, they really wanted to be Jewish, but feel like they can't be for whatever reason. Either they live too far from an established Jewish community or any other reason. So it's kind of just like a bone to be tossed to people to feel like, oh, we fulfilled our responsibility. We don't need to do anything else. And this is wrong. It's wrong on the part of any Jewish leader who uses the laws of Noah in this way to just kind of discard of their responsibility to be a light of God's word to the world. And it's also a failure to live up to your potential on the part of the Noahide, who, if they want to serve God, can serve God to the fullness of their ability. And embracing Torah doesn't mean that you have to do everything perfectly. That is a misnomer. It means that you've embraced in your heart and in your mind the fullness of God's kingship over you, over your life, right? That's what it means to embrace Torah. It doesn't mean I'm perfectly doing everything all the time. If that were the case, nobody embraces Torah. No one, right? So don't think that you cannot become part of the people of Israel because you may struggle with certain mitzvot. Being Torah observant doesn't mean you don't struggle with certain mitzvot. It doesn't mean even that there's not certain mitzvot that you're always going to be struggling with. What it means is that you accept the authority of God over the universe, his absolute lordship over the universe and in your own life personally. If you do that, then you can be Jewish. You're qualified to be a part of the people of Israel. That's it. Noahide, this question of can a Noahide be a Buddhist? Well, let me ask you this. If you're even asking that question and you care about it, well, can you be Jewish? And why would you not want to be? So although I would say that the laws of Noah as a system do exist, they don't exist in Jewish sources as a preferred alternative to keeping Torah. It's not a preferred alternative in the sources. That's the innovation. It is a preferred alternative to be an absolute barbarian who's going around slaughtering children. But is that the standard that we want to hold you to? That's ridiculous. Is that the standard you want to hold yourself to? Yes, sir.
Is it kind of like recognizing a people over there that are ethical, and they align with some. They're not to be trained on how to be a Noahide, but it's more of a recognition. Well, they're Noahides, or you would look at a different group and say, well, they're barbarians, or they're
You
not.
could be a Noahide and not honor your parents. You could be a Noahide and never pray, right? And you would
Right.
still be keeping the laws of Noah. That doesn't mean that a Noahide can't pray. And the mainstream Noahide movement very much promotes going above and beyond the laws of Noah. But that's not the laws of Noah. You're already going above and beyond the laws of Noah.
Right,
And to say that those additions, such as prayer, such as honoring your parents, to say that that is the laws of Noah, that is a problem as well. That is not the laws of Noah. Within the laws of Noah, you're permitted to do those things, and it's good that you do. That's to be encouraged. But they are not the laws of Noah. That's a mistake. If you want to live a proper life, God did not offer you the laws of Noah as your ideal way of serving him. It's what's called b'di'avad, and that is the b'di'avad of b'di'avad. That is the bare minimum acceptable low tier of the bare minimum low tiers, right? To not be liable for a death penalty, right? That's what you want to identify with? In the laws of conversion, in the Talmud, in the Gemara, in the Talmud, in the Mishneh Torah, in the Shulchan Aruch, and all three, meaning even the more recent codes of Jewish law that are basically universally respected in the Jewish world. And all three, it's written that when someone comes wanting to join the people of Israel, yes, we're to inform them of some of the difficulties that come along with joining the people of Israel. Yes, if you join the people of Israel, you are likely to be persecuted. Yes, there will be a harsh penalty for high-handed violation of Shabbat if we have a functioning temple in Jerusalem, which we don't currently have. So it does say we should tell them these things in order that they know that this is a serious thing. But it explicitly states, and you should not elaborate on these things lest you discourage them, causing them to turn away from the good path that they are on to the bad path. The good path that they are on, embracing the fullness of Torah as an Israelite, to the bad path, not embracing the fullness of Torah as an Israelite. It doesn't say here, oh, and there's also, in this particular place in Jewish law, which you will find in the Talmud, Mishneh Torah, and Shulchan Aruch that we all go by, you will not find there, except for the laws of Noah, that's also a good path. It doesn't say that. To the contrary is implied, right? The Noahide laws may be a good path for you in an unideal scenario, in an unideal situation, right? But that's like saying that wrapping tefillin, putting on tefillin on my right arm is for all people, it's this is the ideal situation when it's not. But it might be the ideal situation for someone who doesn't have a left hand or a left arm, right? But you do have, I'm assuming, you do have both your hands. The fact of the matter is, if you have a heart and a mind that wants to serve God to the fullness of your ability, then you have both arms, so to speak, capable of keeping God's commandments as an Israelite. Yes, sir. You had a question about Christians.
Yeah.
So in the same
you
vein,
could almost say,
yeah.
does a Christian meet the level of Noahide?
Okay, so that's a great question. The main issue here is going to be with idolatry and not adding to the laws of Noah and not adding to the Torah or removing from the Torah. Although the laws of Noah do not require non-Israelites to keep all of the Torah, but the laws of Noah do forbid non-Israelites from innovating their own religious rituals and holidays. It's forbidden. In the source text, it's forbidden. So you could be a Christian because being a Christian doesn't require that you create your own holidays. That's, last I checked, that's nowhere in the New Testament, right? They do it. They do create their own holidays usually, but it's not truly a requirement to be a Christian. The main issue or more prevalent issue, let me clear my throat. The more prevalent issue is adding and removing from the Torah and believing that they, as a Christian, have the authority to add to and remove from the Torah, the authority which they claim is basically God, because any voice they hear in their head, they can easily mistake for God. And so if God told me, then it must be. But you have to remember, if you're going to keep the laws of Noah, it is required that you recognize the authority of the legislation and adjudication of the Torah as God gave to the scholarly councils of Israel, right? If you don't recognize that, you can't keep the laws of Noah. You're not keeping the laws of Noah, right? You can be someone who believes Jesus is the Messiah. To be clear, you can believe Jesus is the Messiah, even if that's a mistake in our understanding, but it doesn't prevent you from keeping the laws of Noah. It doesn't prevent you from recognizing the legislative and judiciary authority of the courts of Israel, right? Scholarly courts. It doesn't prevent that. Unless your understanding of Jesus being the Messiah does prevent that. So that depends on what the connotations of Jesus being the Messiah is to you. And it's not the same for all Christians. And then finally, if you worship Jesus, if you pray to him, if you have if you engage in devotional praise and worship to Jesus, that's a violation of the laws of Noah. You can believe that Jesus is the Messiah without worshiping him. He never asked that his disciples would worship him. In fact, claiming that he did is adding to his words. That's kind of a big problem in the context also of the New Testament. To add to the gospel, that is adding to the gospel of Jesus, right? It might be a gospel, but it's not the gospel of Jesus. When they asked him, how do we pray? He did not say, pray in this manner. Dear Lord Jesus, God the Son, I bow down to you. God forbid. What did he say? It's one of the most well-known teachings of Christianity, that when they asked Jesus how to pray, he said, this is how you should pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, holy is your name, or sanctified is your name, hallowed be thy name. No mention of, dear Lord Jesus, God the Son, I worship you, heaven forbid. It didn't even end the prayer that he gave for his students to say, for his disciples to say. Not only did it not involve worshiping him and praying to him, Jesus, but it did not even involve ending the prayer in Jesus' name. What is this? What has Christianity become? So can a Christian be a Noahide? Absolutely, a Christian can be a Noahide. And I would venture to say that to be a proper Christian requires you to at least be a Noahide. And ideally, it means to join the people of Israel. That's what it really means in the fullest sense of the term.
Yeah.
To join the people of Israel, having abandoned your idolatry, having abandoned your rebelling against the teachings of Jesus. Now, if you do it out of unawareness, out of lack of knowledge, I can't say that's rebellion, because rebellion requires a conscious act of high-handed sin. But once you know, once you've connected the dots, that Jesus never told you to worship him, then it becomes a rebellion, not just against God, which should be sufficient already, but it's also a rebellion against Jesus, the one who you believe is the Messiah. If he's the Messiah, he leads the world to serve the one true God and not bring glory to himself. And establishment Christianity has done the opposite of that. I can't say with regard to the New Testament, at least with regard to the words of Jesus as recorded in the New Testament, I can't say that that is Jesus's fault. I can't say that that's what Jesus taught. It'd be easy to do that, but I don't see any evidence for that. There are some questionable passages attributed to Jesus that I can understand being questionable, but there's not a single place where Jesus said, I am God the Son, worship me. Not a single place. There are a few places where popular Christian translations render the text as if people worship Jesus, but it never has Jesus telling people to worship him. And the places where they deceptively render the text as if people are worshiping Jesus, in those places, if you look up the Greek word, you see that this is the same exact Greek word that's used in the Septuagint, the ancient Greek version of the Hebrew Bible, the same exact Greek term that's used for when Jacob bowed down to his brother Esau 7 times. And who says that Jacob was worshiping Esau? So this is a disingenuous, theologically biased, and theologically motivated mistranslation of the New Testament to say that they were worshiping Jesus. It is deception. And if you're using a translation that translates this term in such a way, you should know that you're using a disingenuously biased translation of the New Testament, and not all translations are the same. Now, it doesn't mean that every place in that translation is wrong and untrustworthy, but you bet your high dollar that at least in certain key places in the New Testament, that translation is unreliable. It's dishonest. It's not your fault. It's the fault of those who translated and marketed that text. So free yourself from that.
Definitely. Definitely free
And
yourself.
he who the word of God has set free, he is free indeed.
Yeah. So it's really just a lack of understanding what the Torah says on many of these things that they're doing today. Like there are beliefs that are just perfectly fine, but then there are actions that are
Correct.
completely against Torah. And if you're a believer, let's just say of Yeshua, and you are doing certain things that the Torah does not allow, you have a conflict, but you can learn how to discover what those problems are and and
And to be
teshuva.
clear, correct. And to be clear, we're not saying that you're going to hell or something like that.
No.
Heaven forbid. Torah Judaism distinguishes between high-handed sin and inadvertent sin that occurs as a mistake, that you didn't know any better or you felt coerced, things like that. There is a clear
Absolutely.
distinction. And the majority of sincere Christians, needless to say, they're sincere. And we all have things in our minds and in our lives that we're probably doing wrong, that with time, God willing, we will come to realize and we'll fix them as we find out. It's not rebellion until you know better, and then you're high-handedly, defiantly continuing in that. But Jesus never said to worship me. And if you're struggling with the concept of the Trinity, I know, because I used to be a Christian, I know you cannot honestly just magically stop believing in the Trinity. So this is what I would suggest to you if you're struggling with the concept of the Trinity. If you believe that Jesus is a person of the Trinity or something like that, and he became a man, then by virtue of the word became, you're acknowledging that the physical body of Jesus is not that person of the Trinity that pre-existed, that then took on that body. In other words, that person of the Trinity is distinct from the body that it took upon itself, whatever that means. So I would recommend, it's unreasonable to expect that someone struggling with the Trinity can just magically stop believing in it. They can work through it with time and figure out the inconsistencies of it. But until that point, I would simply recommend that when you worship God, even if you believe in the Trinity. Do not have in mind that you are worshiping or sending your prayers to a body, to an image of Jesus, which is not Jesus, but is a figment of your imagination. You don't know what Jesus looked like, and even if you did, you must know that even if the Trinity were true, the physical body that he inhabited is not that person of the Trinity. That's like mistaking the burning bush for the voice, or for the one behind the voice that spoke through it. Moses would have been an idolater to mistake the image of the burning bush for the incomparable one who spoke through it. Heaven forbid that we would do that. So similarly, even if Jesus was an incarnation of a part of the Trinity, the body that he was incarnated into is not that person of the Trinity. So don't worship that body. You're literally worshiping a created thing if you're worshiping either the body of Jesus or an imaginary body of Jesus in your head. So first, free yourself of that. Think no image or form when you are praying. Don't direct your worship to that image or form. And don't fool yourself into thinking that's Jesus. It's not. It's an imagination. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's a big point. For my whole life, of course, I always would think, or I grew up a little Catholic kid, and I'm sitting there looking. There he is up on the cross, and you got the 12 stages around the sanctuary of the cross, and you always had that picture. Then I got out of there, and I never really stopped thinking or imagining who I'm praying to, up until it started to wane off. But once I saw it in Torah and it was clear, it was like, whoa, I'm not allowed to do that. I started to separate from, and I still struggle, not so much today, but as I tried to get rid of that, it just was a habit, that you would think about things. So some people, have images in their house or on the wall.
The prohibition of idolatry is not that we can't have an image.
Yeah.
It's that we are not to make an image for the purpose of serving it.
Yeah.
You're not, and if you have an image, you're not to serve it. So that's
Right.
two
But look,
distinct prohibitions.
if you have an image on the wall and when you go to pray, you're thinking of that image, and
Of course,
that's
you're
the
serving
problem.
that image.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Also,
Yeah.
we're not to make an image of anything that we think is God. Right.
Mhm.
If you think
Right.
Jesus is God, then it's a prohibition explicit in the Torah to make an image of him. What the heck is
There's
one of the Ten
that.
Commandments?
Yeah.
It's another thing if you make an image of Jesus, but you don't think he's God, and you're just having this image as a representative of a historical figure, and you're not using it as a part of worship, right? Like if
Yeah.
you have an image of Jesus in a movie, in a cartoon, right? For example. But if you have an image of Jesus and you're thinking this is truly representing God, that's a violation of the word of God, a severe violation of the word of God. All the more so if you serve it, if you direct your prayers to that image. It's unacceptable.
So
And that's
learn where the issues are in your walk that you're and like we said, you're unaware. It's not like you're doing it high-handed and you're going to hell.
correct.
You're just not aware of certain things in Torah that is very clear.
Yeah.
And things that you can get rid of. I can promise you that.
Jesus compared himself to the bronze snake that was lifted up in the desert for the people of Israel to look to, and then they would be healed. Did Moses claim that that bronze snake was God? No. What was that bronze snake? That bronze snake did not heal the Israelites. What it was a reminder of their sin, and by lifting it up, it was showing that their sins are exposed to God. And lifting up their heads, they may be reminded of the one who's aware of all things and repent and cry out to God, and then they're healed. It's idolatry and ridiculous to think that some man-made fashioned bronze snake saved them. That's ridiculous. But the snake saved them. It did save them in a way, but the power was not in that bronze snake itself, but rather that bronze snake saved the Israelites as a catalyst for turning their minds back to God and turning away from their sin. And this is what Jesus explicitly compared himself to. He explicitly compared himself to this snake. Do not worship the snake. Even if it's lifted up for your salvation, that salvation is not for the sake of worshiping the one that was lifted up to remind you of your sin, but that one that was lifted up is only saving you as a catalyst for turning you back to your Father in heaven, not as an end unto itself. And what happened to that bronze snake when people made the mistake of turning the agent of God's salvation? What happened? It's in the Bible. It's in the Hebrew Bible. What happened when that snake that was lifted up for their salvation, for the salvation of Israel, when they mistook the agent of God's deliverance for the source of God's deliverance, and when they mistook that agent of God's salvation for an object that should be worshipped, what was done? Then the righteous leaders of Israel pulverized it to a powder. And it could be, I'm just speculating here, but I have a strong hunch that it could be that that's what happened with the awareness of the historical righteous man of Jesus, of the people of Israel, who was a righteous man. But when they saw that some people had perverted his message and modified and corrupted the character of Jesus so much that it became a stumbling block of idolatry, that in the same way that God commanded that bronze statue to be lifted up in the desert, and yet it was our duty to pulverize it because it was no longer what it was originally, but it had been turned into an idol rather than something that turns us back to God. So it could be that the sages of Israel, at least in the first few generations after Jesus, it could be that in a sense they pulverized the image of Jesus or the name of Jesus, not the historical Jesus, but what it had been perverted into, that they then figured it is better that we just forget this rather than maintain this stumbling block of idolatry among our people. That doesn't erase the historical person of Jesus, but rather it's a trade-off, like many other things that they did. We used to proclaim the Ten Commandments daily in our daily prayers, but there arose a Gnostic sect that believed that the Ten Commandments represented 10 powers. Forget the Trinity. There were 10 powers, and there's sort of like a vestigial continuation of this, believe it or not, that still exists. And so because some of the Jewish people were falling for this Gnostic sect And we're also saying you only need to keep the Ten Commandments. So they downplayed it and removed it from being a required part of our daily prayers. It's not that they nullified the historical Ten Commandments, but they nullified this misrepresentation of what it came to be. But those who have matured beyond that stumbling block, of course they can read the Ten Commandments every day, right? Within its proper context. Yallah. Next question. Oh, one little last thing. Also, if you're struggling with the Trinity, not reasonable to think you can just stop believing in the Trinity. But the establishment teaching of the Trinity in Christianity is, but to be very clear, and if you don't know this, you should look it up. The mainstream view of the Trinity of all denominations is not that there are three tangible physical bodies, right, that are independent wills, but rather that there's this, they usually translate it as persons into English, but it's not persons in the way that people normally think. It's hypostasis, if I'm saying it correctly. I don't believe in this, right? But the traditional view of the Trinity is that these three existences of whatever they are one, not just in will, but they're also one in essence. They are the same in essence, right? Though I think this is a contradiction, I'm certain of it, but regardless of that, when you are worshiping God, even if you're one who believes in the Trinity, you are still able to be in conformity with the laws of Noah if when you worship God, who you think is a Trinity, don't worship them as separate persons, even if you think that they are persons, but they're not literal, tangible three persons, and they're one in essence. So what should you do? What I'm going to tell you now does not contradict the teachings of Jesus in the least. I challenge anyone to say that it does, and show me how. Even if you believe in the Trinity, just worship that one essence that those three persons have as the same, that they're the same essence. Okay? So just worship that one essence, which is not a Trinity. So the Trinity is that they believe three in one and they are one in essence. Then worship that one essence, which has no form or image, because that is what is fundamentally God. If that is not what is fundamentally God, then you're in trouble. Just worship the one essence of God. There is no other. Sha'illah haba'ah.
Sha'illah haba'ah. So this next one's kind of a long one, and I'm going to preface it by saying I think he's addressing the Orthodox establishment rather than Rabbi Yosef or the Mishnah Walk specifically.
Okay.
Now my phone doesn't want to open up. There it is. So Mordechai on Facebook asks, why don't you go by the halakhic requirements to conversion and instead torture potential converts for months or even years to dismay them from becoming a Jew and misrepresent entirely the process of conversion? Why is your minhag to add to the conversion process when in reality the only mitzvot we should be reminded of is what some call Noahide laws, because a non-Jew isn't supposed to be taught Judaism? Why not have the Beit Din requiring 3 hedyatot?
Yeah, hedyotot. Very good pronunciation. That means just regular Joes that have a minimum, baseline level of Torah observance.
Okay. One being a rabbi, the oath, the warning, the circumcision or brit, and the mikvah and bruha. And that's it. And why rabbis not recognize other certified Orthodox rabbis' conversions? Why keep people out? Hashem don't want that.
Hashem don't want that? Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, so that was a lot. You gave us the basic idea. Let's break it down. Can you start off with the first part?
So the first part is, why don't you go by the halakhic requirements to conversion and instead torture potential converts for months or years to prevent them?
Okay, let's stop there because it is a lot.
Yes.
Okay, so number one, I will not deny that in the Orthodox establishment, especially the so-called ultra-Orthodox or black hat establishment, that it is true that the way the conversion process, which is really a naturalization process of joining a nation, which is inseparably tied to the covenant of Torah, that the way they do it is in violation of the instructions of the sages of Israel, of classical Torah Judaism. Right? It's in violation of it. That does not mean that once you go through with it in such a process, this does not mean that such a conversion is invalid. That is not what I'm saying. It is valid. But the way in which they make the newcomer learn extensively, sometimes for years before going through with the conversion, is a direct violation of the clear instruction of the sages of Israel, of the Talmudic sages. It's a clear violation of the universally accepted codifications of Talmudic law, including the Shulchan Aruch, which those same organizations and communities claim to go by. I challenge you all, if any rabbi of Haredi establishment, of a black hat establishment, claims to go by the Shulchan Aruch, I challenge you to look up these guidelines. This is a violation of it. The way they do it, why do they do it? Some of it I can understand. It doesn't change the fact that it's a contradiction, but some of it I can understand, and some of it is unjustifiable. And to be clear, not all ultra-Orthodox communities violate it to the same degree. There's a difference between requiring a year of study, but doing it in a respectful way and not going back on your word, not deceiving people, even though you're taking longer than our sages instructed us. But that's different from it taking a year or 3 years and misleading the newcomers and making them feel inferior for no reason, right? And that happens, and it's not spoken up about enough, because once someone does go through the conversion, then if they speak up about it, there's a serious threat that they may not be able to find a spouse if they were single. They may not be offered shidduchim, because in the Orthodox establishment, you don't just randomly date people, there's a matchmaker. So if they make too many waves in the community, it's going to have a negative backlash. So this suppresses people from speaking up against the abuses that they suffered. Same with their children. If they have children, then their children won't be accepted to the schools. It's a huge problem. And the majority of the Jewish world recognizes this problem. So to be clear, this is not an abuse of power that is the fault of the majority of the Jewish world. It's specific, especially to the ultra-Orthodox, so-called ultra-Orthodox establishment. And it's specific to the leadership of certain sectors. But the leadership of certain sectors of the ultra-Orthodox establishment that have disproportionate power and influence, monopoly, dare we say, over the conversion processes. So why do they do it? One, there is a need for education, of course, but our sages did not say it should take a year. In fact, they said that after you've given a brief introduction to Torah covenant, to joining the people of Israel, you should inform them a second time about some of the commandments, some of the weightier, heavier ones, and some of the lighter ones, a second time while they're in the water of immersion. And if they said this during a period of time when we were under severe persecution by the Romans, you can't tell me that there's a greater threat nowadays. Come on, seriously, who are we fooling? So another way in which this has taken hold of the religious establishment is due to a doctrinal error, and Jews don't typically use this term doctrine, but it does exist, doctrinal or dogmatic error of what's called das Teure. Das Teure, it really should be da'ath Torah, but it's a innovation that is a severe violation of the fundamentals of classical Torah Judaism. There is a concept of da'ath Torah which is legitimate, that there is a broad knowledge of Torah sources that scholars of the people of Israel have, that the average Jew doesn't have. And when we don't know any better, when we're not competent enough, we should rely on them when we don't know any better. Just like you should rely on your physician because they're more competent in medicine usually. Okay, of course, there are people thinking, yeah, not about this, not about that. Usually they're more competent than you. So you should rely on them when you don't know any better. But that has been perverted into almost an idolatrous concept of our rabbis are infallible. And even when we have learned backwards and forwards a certain text, and we see that Rabbi XYZ is teaching the exact opposite, we can't question it because our leaders are infallible. Now you've elevated your leaders to a godlike status. HaKadosh Baruch Hu alone, Hu levado, He alone, the Holy One, the God of Israel alone, is immune to error. And to elevate any human being, no matter how great, to elevate him to a point of unquestionable allegiance, you have made that one a God. Just because you don't say it is God, just because you're not saying that this rabbi is your God, doesn't mean that in practice you haven't made him your God. You have. If you think that anyone, whether it's me, heaven forbid, whether it's Victor or Heather, whether it's the Rebbe of Lubavitch, whether it's Jesus, whether it is the head of the Aida Haredith, the highest, most respected rabbinic court in the ultra-Orthodox world, doesn't matter who it is. The moment you've elevated them on par with a level of authority that belongs to God alone, Baruch Hu, you have created another God. Don't think for a moment that the ancient Israelites, when we committed the great sin of the golden calf, of the Heta Egel, don't think for a moment that they actually thought that that golden calf was actually God. They didn't. He was just a representative of him. But they made a mistake of thinking that the leaders of Israel who fell in that error had an authority that was on par, equal to or above God's prohibition of doing such a thing. So they made them their gods, even though they knew that they are not literally the Holy One, blessed be He, even though they knew that they're not literally the Creator, but they elevated the lordship of these leaders equal to or above that of God Himself. You don't have to think that something is uncreated in order to make it your God. And if the elders of Israel, the sages of Israel, of that generation, committed such a grave error, do you think the rabbis of today are immune? Do you think they're greater than Aaron, the brother of Moses? Who are you? How dare you think such a thing? The chutzpah, seriously, mazeh, this shigon. And, how can you even think for a moment that the rabbis of our generation, however great they be, they could have all of Shas memorized ba'al peh, lo meshane. It doesn't matter if they have the entire Talmud, both of them memorized word for word, which is absurd to imagine. But some people clearly are just gullible sheep. But who cares? Let's say your rabbi has it all memorized, word by word, verbatim. They are still not God. They are still not infallible. And to say that they're immune to an error, any error, to say that they are unquestionable in such an absolute sense that they can just toss out the guidelines of our sages regarding conversion or any other matter, and you can't question them on that, that is a nullification of one of the 613 commandments. We have an entire tractate of the Talmud dedicated to when the great Sanhedrin, the highest, most esteemed scholars, the most educated of the scholars of Israel, the great Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court of Israel, who God commanded us to heed. We have explicit commandments from God in the Torah that when they make an error, they're to bring an offering in the temple. This is Masechet Shagagot. This is an entire tractate. You're just throwing it out the window. You think you know better than Hazal? You think you know better than the sages of the Talmud? You think you know better than God, who commanded that commandment that when the eyes of the community err and lead the masses astray, that they're to make an offering? You think God doesn't know what He's talking about? How dare you? And I'm not speaking to you guys. I'm talking to those rabbis who dare to either toss out the instruction of our sages and then misrepresent Mesoret Israel, the tradition of Israel, misrepresent this, and thereby desecrate God's name in the nations. That's what they're doing. That's what you're doing if you're misrepresenting Torah Judaism in a way that gives the people of Israel a bad name. And as a consequence of that, gives the God of Israel a bad name. Hilul Hashem Gamur. There's no excuse for this. No excuse. No excuse. And you have every right, if you're in such a conversion program, to find this appalling, right? I encourage you to leave such a conversion program if you're being mistreated, disrespected, because you had a sincere question and you asked it humbly, and then they're going to throw a wrench in your conversion process for that, right? I'm not talking about if you're worshiping Jesus, right? That's a whole different. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if you have a sincere question. Some people, they add on a whole nother year or 2 years because they had a sincere question, and the rabbi just used it as an excuse to delay it, but they're getting paid money for it. Do we need to feed the anti-Semitic tropes? The majority of the Jewish people are not of this way. But you as a leader are feeding these anti-Semitic tropes. You're feeding the enemies of Israel. It's unbelievable. I'm sorry, it's just horrible. Everybody thinks just because they put on a black hat and a black coat and have a big beard and speak with an Ashkenazi accent, right? I can't even do it, and I'm glad that I can't do it. But just because you have some Ashkenazi accent, which is not even authentically Ashkenazi, because authentic Ashkenazi tradition came from the Middle East, is not under the influence of Polish dialects of Slavic languages, okay? But just because you have some accent that's too stubborn to conform itself with classical Hebrew doesn't make you infallible, doesn't make your rabbi infallible. Who am I to question your rabbi? Who are you to question my rabbis? Who are you? Don't give them even a shred of credibility if they don't respect you. Go to someone else. There are other Orthodox establishments that are recognized by the state of Israel, that while they may not do a quick conversion, will respect you more. And we can provide you links to such people. If you don't want to go to Rabbi XYZ, you can go to another rabbi. There are alternatives. But yeah, in short, that's why. There are 2 reasons. One, because if you do a quick conversion, it makes sense that a lot of people are going to question it, even though our sages did guide us to do such conversions. If we see that the person is sincere, you do need to see that the person is sincere, but it doesn't take 3 years. It doesn't take 5 years. It doesn't take $5,000, right? That is an abuse of power. But our sages did guide us to do quick conversions, for lack of a better word, once you see the sincerity of the person, not to drag it along. And it's forbidden to teach a newcomer years of Torah when they haven't joined the people of Israel. That's explicitly forbidden. So that's one of the reasons, a practical reason. They don't want to be, a rabbi who's overseeing a conversion doesn't want to be viewed with suspicion. Why did you let him convert so quickly? Right? And it makes sense that might happen. The other reason is what we've been talking about, what I've been ranting on. That's this false doctrine of das Torah, a perversion of Torah, which is an idolatry that's crept into the people of Israel, right? And which we need to repent of. If you realize you're in a community that is pushing this idea of infallible rabbinic leadership that you can't ask any question about, that is not classical Torah Judaism. Doesn't matter how religious and strict they are with other areas. You can be extremely strict in one area of Torah and still be doing absolute idolatry. Get away from it. It's better to be in a less strict community that doesn't idolize idolatry. Get away from that. But that's the reason. I'd say that's 2 reasons. All right, some practical necessities and idolatry that's crept in certain segments of the Orthodox world. Sorry for getting pumped there, but it's a desecration of God's name, and you should not be afraid to speak out against it. Sha'Allah haba'a. Next question.
Well, it's probably in the same vein, but would you
Just say
say it's a
Sha'Allah haba'a.
sha'Allah haba'a?
Yes, sir.
Haba. Haba?
Haba'a, because
Haba'a.
Sha'Allah is feminine. So when a word, a noun that you're describing ends with an a, it usually means it's feminine. And that's why the description of it also needs to be feminine.
Even if
So
I'm a guy.
yeah, even if you're
Yeah.
because you're not referring to yourself.
Right,
You're
right,
referring
right.
to the question.
Okay.
Right? So the question is feminine.
Sha'Allah haba'a.
Yes, sir.
So would you say that it's a mitzvah to help someone in their naturalization into Israel?
I
Are
love
you
that you said
doing?
that. Yes. When you say that, he's
Oh,
referring to conversion, but
yeah.
naturalization is a better term.
Yeah, well, people don't convert to become Americans. They naturalize into America.
Correct. And same
It's,
thing here. Usually when
yeah.
someone converts, really their mind and their heart already converted. It's a
Mm.
formal process, right? This is what we call in legal terms a naturalization. Yes,
Right.
sir. So,
So,
what was the question?
well, first of all, you would agree that it is a mitzvah for you to help someone
Meaning
convert.
a duty.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So
If you see that they are sincere, I'm not saying it's a mitzvah to help just anyone, but the
sure.
moment you see that they're sincere, of course it's a mitzvah.
Hinder? How are you going to hinder them? I mean, how do you get?
It's one of the Rambam lists it in one of the 613 mitzvot to draw them to to be under the presence of God.
Well, there must be a different list then, because there are groups
There are different lists.
Yeah, there are groups that will not convert you. In other words, no, they don't do any conversions. That's not something we do. It's almost like giving them an out to say no. Well, no, we don't do that. We don't do that.
Sometimes it's just an excuse. Other times, I know it personally, it's not always an excuse. Sometimes the rabbi may want to help people, may want to do conversions, but because his congregation or his own rabbi wants him or will only give him certification as a rabbi, or will only maintain his recognition of his smicha, will only maintain recognition of his ordination if he associates with a certain organization. If that organization forbids him from doing conversions, then he's pushed to not do conversions. But even if a rabbi is in such a situation, you can still do it.
Yeah, so
if it's not
I forgot that they have to actually kind of re-up. I forgot about that because I know a rabbi who has to go through that, on a regular basis.
Yeah. And they're not going to put their name out there if it's going to mess up who their children can marry or what schools they can go to, or make them lose their job. You train for 4 or 5 years to become a rabbi, and then you lose they have to eat also, even if it's not such a lucrative business. It's usually not, by the way, not in the Orthodox world. So then that's their job, is teaching and maintaining that community. But it's a big problem. So even if you are a rabbi and you're afraid to lose your credentials if you rebel, you can still help them. They don't have to be doing it through you under your name, but you can still point them to places where they can.
Sure.
Nothing is stopping you. And that's their duty.
All right. So how those that may be watching that have listened to what you explained and the requirements per Hazal and the sages, they
Hazal
come.
are the sages. It's an acronym referring to the sages of ancient Israel.
Yes. I was saying it for their benefit. In other words, the past leaders of who made all the rules that we have to follow.
Right.
If they come to Mishnah Walk, does Mishnah Walk help them with that process?
We will be helping them, and we do help you, but we do need to be clear that we're not as organized as we will be. We're just starting out to be able to help them in a systematic and organized way. I wouldn't say that right now we're where we need to be with regard to that, but that is in our goals, and that will be within our means. And it is already within our means to at least point you toward people who will guide you through a conversion process in a more respectful and dignified way, which even if it's not having you in the waters of immersion the second time you're learning about the commandments, but it'll at least be in a more respectful way.
Yeah, no, it's a good thing you brought that up because I don't see that we can have a meeting with someone 5 minutes later and then put them in the water at the next meeting because there's a lot of baggage that came out of Christianity that people need to that is a zero tolerance item. So in other
Correct.
words, don't teach them, how to split their butter
Well,
and meat
let's
correctly,
well, let's
but
put it
there are
this way.
bigger items. Yeah.
Let's put it this way, whether it's idolatry or some nuance of keeping the commandments that they're struggling with,
Hmm.
a person is not ready and has not fully accepted the mitzvot. Even if they say that
Hmm.
they have not in practice until they accept the authority of the legislative and judicial system that God established with the people of Israel. So they may have accepted in theory the commandments, but that's part of the commandments. If they have not yet accepted the legislative and judicial authority of the courts of the scholars of Israel, specifically the great Sanhedrin and those who represent them, then they have excuse me, they have not yet accepted the fullness of God's covenant with Israel.
Sure.
Even if they want to, they still haven't.
So there's a
So that
little bit of training
means,
that needs to happen.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But if they
Hmm.
have accepted that authority,
Well,
then you don't have to be dragging your feet to do it. If you see that they really have. No, but
sure.
if somebody comes saying I accept all the Torah and maybe they intend to, but they don't really, you see that they don't really know what it is yet on a fundamental level. They don't need to know every detail, but if they don't yet recognize the authority of the sages of the historical people of Israel, they they haven't yet, even if they think that they have. But the moment you see, because that's such a basic thing, it's a foundational thing. The moment that you see that they have, then they don't need to keep dragging their legs through training. Also, they shouldn't be. And this is a problem with a lot of the Orthodox conversion processes. Even people, sometimes even people go through the whole thing and they don't really understand this because the rabbis who they're learning under don't lay it out in the right,
Mm.
you know, in the right
Don't hit the
steps
basics.
and the right steps. Yeah,
Mm.
they skip to learning details of kosher cheese before
Yeah.
they've made sure that the person they're teaching kosher cheese halachot about uh, before they've taught them the absolute authority of the great Sanhedrin. That's a big problem, not
Yes.
just with potential converts. This is a big problem in the Orthodox establishment, to the point that the term Orthodox is almost silly because it doesn't matter how strict you are if you do not understand that the Supreme Council of the Scholars of Israel, sitting in the Shkat Gazit, in the temple, have supreme authority over some local rabbinic court in Chicago. If you don't understand that, you're messed up. It doesn't matter how strict you are already, you're missing a basic foundation. So that needs to be taught first. If that is there, then you don't need to be dragging your feet. They're ready to join the people of Israel.
So, for what that looks like, would you, looking and knowing Victor as you know him, is he ready to jump in?
Oh yeah, definitely.
All
In
right.
fact,
So
I
there's
already
hope for
see
all of you.
I already see the condensation of the mikvah water forming on your forehead.
That's funny.
It's a problem. It should have been done yesterday. Let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. All right, Heather. Ah,
Well, unless
yes.
someone else has
No,
something.
no. You
Go
got
ahead.
in there.
B'chavod, go right ahead.
Okay, mine is switching gears a little back to Shabbat. Sorry, I know I kind of wait, but I'm looking at the challah bread. Is it required to have two loaves
On
to
Shabbat,
start on Shabbat?
it depends
Or
on
can
what you
I?
mean by required. You're not really required in the sense that you're doing a sin if you don't have it. Not in that sense. There are different types of requirements, for lack of a better word, and there are different terms in
Okay.
Hebrew for these different concepts. It's not required in that you're actively doing a sin by not having it, but uh, it is a normative practice that was instituted by the early sages of well, by the Talmudic sages. But if you don't have it on hand, it's not that you're actually sinning, right? And this is a rabbinic concept also from the get-go. Uh, If you don't have it on hand, then yeah, you just don't eat it. Also, if like you just don't like bread, don't eat it because the whole purpose of it, well, part of the purpose of it was
Yeah,
to
in
enjoy
my
the meal. Go
case,
ahead. Go ahead.
is I have intolerance to bread.
All the more so.
Um,
All the more so.
but
No, don't eat it. That's
but
wrong.
but I mean, I do get it. And the other thing is, I just find out a store that makes supposedly kosher challah bread, so I buy it because my kids like to eat it too.
Okay.
I
Well,
only
it's
get
good.
one loaf.
As long as you don't have some kind of allergy that will cause you a reaction, even if you're just kind of like in the presence of it and a particle touches you, as long as it's not that
No,
extreme, then
it's
you're
not
doing a
that
good
extreme.
then you're doing a good
Yeah,
thing to have your kids at least get used to it, even if you don't eat from it. As
yeah,
long as they understand, they should understand that you're not eating it, not because you don't want to, but because it has a negative effect on you.
yeah. And I guess the other question is it okay to buy it or should you be making it?
Of course you can buy it. Of course.
Okay.
You do
And
need
does
to
it
be
have to
careful
be
with,
made?
go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. I guess I'll ask the whole thing and then you can answer it. So I guess is it buying it? Does it need to be made on the same day? Can I buy it a week in advance and freeze it and then
Of course. Yeah,
have it
you can
ready
buy
for
it.
Shabbat?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. What you do need to be careful about with bread is that there's a few issues. Um, the more severe issue is a lot of bread is made with dairy product in it.
Right.
So you be careful not to eat it with meat if there's dairy in it. So you need to know whether or not there's dairy in it. If there is dairy in it, it's not that you can't eat it, but you need to be careful not to eat it in a meal with meat. And secondly, there is a prohibition of pat nochri, which is bread produced by idolaters. And there's a general status of non-Jews in general being assumed to be idolaters unless you know otherwise. However, this is a rabbinic fence to separate us from the idolaters. And there are several leniencies or openings which, if you're in an area where there's not uh, a Jewish bakery, within reasonable distance to you, reasonably priced, and then there are mainstream leniencies that permit you to eat bread cooked and on an industrial level, baked on an industrial level, and understandings that prohibition of pat nochri only applies to bread which is produced in a how do I say this, in a private house, for example, like your neighbor made the bread and brought it over to your house, but that it would not necessarily apply on an industrial level, whether it's a business or like a machine spitting out, the pattern, which is probably the case in certain companies.
Mm.
They don't necessarily have somebody doing each and every one. So if that's the case, all the more so. Yeah, go ahead.
Milk was the issue that I would run into when I would go to a store.
That's a bigger issue.
Yeah. I didn't know it. I was thinking, is this has dairy in it? And they're like, yeah. Did
Yeah.
you want us to make it without? And we can. I'm like, okay, well, we eat a lot of meat at our house, so yes, that would be preferred. So
Yeah.
it was the last time I did that. But the other thing is the oven is cooking a pepperoni bread before
You don't have
that.
to worry about it.
All right.
Unless you want to take upon yourself the stringencies of an ultra-Orthodox community. And then you don't have, it's not a halakha that originates from the universally authoritative halachic sources.
Okay.
It's not there.
What you were kind of touching on, I just was wanting to
There are different
kind of
levels of authority.
paint that.
I'm not
Okay,
saying
good.
that it's illegitimate to be extra
Yeah.
strict like that, but it's not from the higher level of authority of the great Sanhedrin. Right?
The
So if
teachings
that's a real,
from,
go ahead.
I was going to say the teachings of Rabbi Halevi Kasherut cover all of these topics about bread and flavor. I guess the concern was more with the flavor.
Correct.
And buying the purchasing of bread back in those days, what he was saying is that people will usually get it directly from people. The concern there was not so much eating of the bread, but the relationship that happens because of the bread
Absolutely.
exchange.
Absolutely. But
And
that has more to do with what we were talking about before, pat nochri,
yeah,
bread of idolaters. That's the main thing. But the issue with milk, meat and milk, that's also a legitimate thing, and that's deriving from a more authoritative source that you need to be careful with. That's even if it's a Jewish person who baked it, doesn't make a difference. You got people don't always think about bread containing dairy, but usually bakeries that are under the auspices of rabbinic supervision are not going to be dairy if it looks like regular bread. There's a rabbinic prohibition on that. Yalla, sha'elah haba'ah. Next question, sha'elah haba'ah. I want you guys to say that at least for now.
Sha'elah haba'ah.
Next question.
So Sharon on Facebook asked, "What's your take on the two powers in heaven as seen in the writings of Daniel?" I
All
asked
right,
a rabbi. Do you want me to
go ahead.
finish?
Yeah, go ahead.
I asked a rabbi this question recently because I was curious to know if he was familiar with the scholarship on this point and what he thought about it. I first learned about the two powers from reading Jewish scholar Daniel Boyarin, something like that. But it's been treated by Christian scholars as well.
Okay,
That's
so
the-
in rabbinic literature, two powers refers to idolatry, to an idolatry of the mind, which often eventually manifests as idolatry that's tangible that you actually see. And we see that in segments of Christianity, not all of Christianity. And so it's deriving from a passage in the book of Daniel where Daniel has a vision and he sees two entities in his vision, the Ancient of Days and then a Son of Man. And first, we should point out that regardless of who the Son of Man is or isn't, the fact that it says Son of Man means that it's mortal, not divine. The expression Son of Man is as clear as you can be in Hebrew to say not divine. This can be lost in translation because oftentimes where the Hebrew says Son of Man, it will just be translated as a man or a person or a human. And that's because this term Son of Man is used copiously in Hebrew, very frequently. And it's just that in Christianity, they mostly know this expression in connection to Jesus or in connection to this passage in Daniel, because that's the only place it's getting translated as Son of Man. And all the other places, the translators are translating it as human or person. But in the original language, it's the same exact term. There are translations that are more consistent and will consistently translate it as Son of Man. I think like in the book of Ezekiel, some translations will be careful to translate it as Son of Man. Not all. But first know that this is a normal Hebrew expression that just means mortal, not God. It's literally the antonym of divine. So from the get-go, it's ridiculous. But let's go with it because I know it's so ingrained in most Christians as a sort of like a messianic term. Excuse me, when in reality it's a Hebrew term that is not unique to references to the Messiah, but it's just a Hebrew term that means human being. It's used all the time, both in the Bible and in modern Hebrew, all the time. So let's look this up because Heather had mentioned it before, and it's one of my more favorite topics. So I pulled up the text. Let's begin with the book of Daniel. You guys can see my screen?
And
Okay, let's make sure. I forget what verse was that. Okay. Do we have someone who would like to read? Tur Sheli. My turn. Whoever wants to read, say Tur Sheli. Turn of mine. Tur Sheli.
Ursheli. As I looked on, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His garment was like white snow, and the hair of his head was like lamb's wool. His throne was tongues of flame. Its wheels were blazing fire. So now I'm picturing as I read that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you're not worshiping whatever image comes to your mind, it's okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's first look at this. The throne is tongues of flame. The wheels are blazing fire. This is obviously metaphor, first of all, which we should already know because all of this is in the context of a vision. The whole thing is in the context of a vision. It's not literal, first and foremost. And we should already know because we believe in the Torah, right? God says in the Torah, what? Who would like to read?
Sheli. And God said, Hear these my words. When prophets of Adonai arise among you, I make myself known to them in a vision. I speak with them in a dream.
Okay. Let's keep going.
Not so with my servant Moses. He is trusted throughout my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth, plainly and not in riddles, and he beholds the likeness of Adonai. How then did you not shrink from speaking against my servant Moses?
Okay. So there's a lot that you could unpack from these two passages, but what I really want to focus on is that God himself, this is not rabbinic commentary, juxtaposes, contrasts how he reveals himself to humanity through other prophets, in contrast to how he reveals himself through Moses. With regard to other prophets, unlike Moses, who he speaks mouth to mouth, possibly all Christian translations translate this as face to face, but the Hebrew is literally mouth to mouth. It's as if Moses becomes the mouthpiece of God, speaking directly. Whereas other prophets, God does speak to them, but it's not mouth to mouth. It's not like a literal mouthpiece, but rather God speaks to us through other prophets by making himself known to them through visions and with dreams and with riddles, with metaphors, okay, not plainly. With Moses, it's the opposite. It's plain and not with riddles, right? But with other prophets, it's through metaphors. And then the prophet will be given the interpretation of the metaphor. But the interpretation is coming from a metaphor, something that's not literal. So it is a mistake to take the metaphor literally. That's why you need an interpretation. So let's go back and look at Daniel again. He has this vision. It clearly says it's a vision. And here, this is the verb for a vision. Hazeh is the verb. No. Literally, it's saying there was a vision, right? So, and in Hebrew, this is Aramaic, by the way. In Hebrew, it's hazon with the het. That's the word for vision. It does not refer to something tangible and literal. Let's keep reading. So he had his vision. If you want to go ahead, you can read it one more time. Let's have someone read through the verses so we get a full picture. But remember, according to the Torah, God does not speak to the prophets other than Moses in a direct mouth-to-mouth way, but rather through visions with metaphors. And we also see here in Hosea, chapter 12, verse 11, I speak to the prophets with visions, and I increase by the hands of the prophets metaphor. So I am metaphorized. I am allegorized. Here they say I spoke with prophets, but it's literally I shall allegorize, right? I shall metaphorize. Right? This is such a basic thing. It should always be in the forefront of your mind as you're reading the prophets. All right, Heather, would you like to read? Read through. I'll scroll as you go.
As I looked on, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His garments was like white snow, and the hair of his head was like lamb's wool. His throne was tongues of flame, its wheels were blazing fire. A river of fire streamed forth before him. Thousands upon thousands served him. Myriads upon myriads attended him. The court sat, and the books were opened. I looked on, then because of the arrogant words that the horn spoke, the beast was killed as I looked on. Its body was destroyed, and it was consigned to the flames. The dominion of the other beast was taken away, but an extension of life was given to them for a time and a season. As I looked on in the night vision, one
Right,
like a
it's
human
clearly a vision again. Clearly it's a vision, i.e. a dream, a night vision. Go ahead.
One like a human being came with the clouds of heaven. He reached the Ancient of Days and was presented to him. Dominion, glory, and kingship were given to him. All peoples and nations of every language must serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship one that shall not be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was disturbed within me, and the vision of my mind alarmed me. I approached one of the attendants and asked him the true meaning of all this. He gave me this
Go ahead.
He
Sorry.
gave me this interpretation of the matter.
Right. So Daniel didn't look at this and say, "Oh, this is obvious what this means. Obviously, there's two powers in heaven, and I need to be worshiping them because they're both God." Come on. No, he knew this was odd. This is weird. What does it mean? He's getting the interpretation from one of the, for lack of a better word, divine agents, one of the messengers, one of the angels. When I say divine agent, I don't mean that it is God, to be clear. So he's getting an interpretation. He's not just getting it from a commentary from the Darby Bible. He's not getting it from the Talmud either. He's getting this from one of the entities in this experience. Right? They're interpreting it for him directly. Go ahead.
These great beasts, 4 in number, mean 4 kingdoms will arise out of the earth.
It's a metaphor. Surprise, surprise. They're not literally beasts. They're kingdoms. Let's keep going.
Then the holy ones of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever.
Oh, but who, the holy ones, well, that's plural. And this is not referring to the Most High, but it's plural, something other than the Most High. You don't have to be a genius to know that this is a reference to the servants of God, the Almighty, his people, Israel, the righteous of Israel. Okay. Now let's look. Remember, this is an interpretation of the vision. So what is this parallel to? The beasts we know are parallel to kingdoms. So who are these holy ones who receive the kingdom? Okay, let's go back. What is that referring to in the vision? Where is one who is different from the others, who is given kingship?
And
okay, let's read it again. Where is that parallel? This is an interpretation of this vision. Where is someone being given kingship? Let's keep reading.
As I looked on in the night vision, one like a human being came with the clouds of heaven. He reached the Ancient of Days and was presented to him. Dominion, glory, and kingship were given to him. All peoples and nations of every language must serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship one that shall not be destroyed.
Okay, so that's it. Where are the holy ones, plural? Okay. Holy ones of the Most High receive the kingdom and will possess, who will possess? They, plural, will possess the kingdom forever. Where are they? Here. I don't want to tell you. I want someone to tell me. Where are these plural people mentioned in the vision?
One like a human being.
Yes. There's nothing else that it could be. And it says explicitly, just as it says in the interpretation, that they receive, i.e., they were given kingship, they were given the kingdom, and they will possess it forever. All right, and the plural suffix is clearly indicated in the Aramaic. Right? So in the same way that in the authoritative interpretation given to Daniel, it is not an individual who's given kingship, but it's plural. the holy ones of the Most High. So in the vision, the only thing that could be parallel to is the human being or the one like a human being, and we'll explain why it says like, right? So the only one here that's given that could be possibly parallel to the holy ones being given kingship is the one like a human being, that is the Son of Man, that in the Christian translations is translated as Son of Man, right? And it is given dominion, glory, and kingship. This is the kingdom of Israel. This is the people of Israel. That's why it says like a human being, because the people of Israel as a nation is not a human being, but the people of Israel is frequently throughout the prophets. How do I say this? Is frequently symbolized as a human being, like one man. Many times it's referred to and described as if it is one man. In the book of Isaiah, many times it refers to my servant. God elaborates, expounds upon his servant, spoken in the singular. And then he says, Israel, that they are Israel. Typically, it's understood as being the righteous of Israel, ideal Israel, but it's Israel. Many times. In the book of Exodus, just a few Torah portions ago, God referred to the people of Israel as my firstborn, again, symbolized as one human. That's why it says like, because it's not literally one human, but it's a human. And it's the only parallel in the vision that in the interpretation is the holy ones of the Most High. Now, this isn't just in the book of Daniel, it's in several other places in the prophets where God says that the nations will serve the people of Israel. Okay, let's look up some of these. So go to Tanakh. Yeah. Let's go to Isaiah 49, verse 22. Victor, would you like to read? We're looking for the nations serving the people of Israel. Now, some Christian translations here in Daniel will translate instead of serve, they will say worship. Again, that's misleading, right? Unless you think that Jacob was worshiping Esau, unless you think that here in Isaiah chapter 49, the nations are worshiping the people of Israel, then you should not be translating it as worship in Daniel chapter 7 is the same term, that there is no, that people know this, there is no Hebrew parallel to the English word worship that has the connotation of worship that it exists in modern colloquial English. In modern colloquial English, the term worship means to attribute divinity, to believe it is divine or God. And the historical usage of the word worship in English did not mean that, but that is what it means now in popular usage. And what I'm saying is the term translated as serve and often translated as worship in Christian translations, the underlying original word does not carry that connotation. It can refer to serving the creator, but the word itself does not mean worship as the word worship is used in modern English. All right, let's go ahead.
Is that the word avoda?
Yeah, avodah is the noun
Avodah.
form, service. La avodah is to serve. Go ahead.
Thus said my servant
My
God.
sovereign.
Thank you. That would be a little odd, wouldn't it? Thus
Yeah.
said my sovereign God, I will raise my hand to nations and lift up my ensign to peoples, ensign to peoples, and they shall bring your sons in their bosoms and carry your daughters on their backs. Kings shall tend your children, their queens shall serve you as nurses. They shall bow to you face to the ground, and lick the dust of your feet, and you shall know that I am God. Those who trust in me shall not be shamed.
All right, we could keep going, but that's clear enough.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. There are several other places. Feel free to look those up in your spare time, but that, in short, is the answer. Now,
I think there
Go
might
ahead.
be actual people that look at this and that actually think they will be worshipped someday by the nations, by the
No, not in the Orthodox world.
no,
Not
I mean Christian world.
You have perhaps in the Black Hebrew Israelite world, and they believe, and not to be mistaken for actual Black Israelites. There are
Yeah.
real Black Israelites, but they don't usually go around saying we are the Black Hebrew Israelites. Black Jews and Black Israelites, who are legitimate Israelites, do
Mhm.
not make the color of their skin a significant aspect of their identity, just as white Jews, who do exist, the people of Israel as a nation are not white or black, but there are individuals. No kosher Israelite makes the skin tone a fundamental aspect of their Jewish or Israelite identity. But there are certain uh, cults that have sprung up, racist cults that make their skin color like a huge part of their religious identity. And they are replacement theologist groups, and they believe that God is black. They believe that anyone who is not black or not colored will eventually be enslaved and should be enslaved and will worship them. And they use this to bring that idea, though in classical Torah Judaism, to be a servant of Israel does not mean you actually worship Israel. It means you serve us in the sense that the same way that we would serve a king of Israel, not that we worship him, but that we partner with them and we submit to their uh, oversight of how we should be serving God by partnering with them. But to be a servant of Israel, by definition, in classical Judaism means you are no longer one of the pagan nations, but that you have joined the people of Israel, you've partnered with Israel. All right, so what were you asking about?
Mm.
I
Well,
lost
you brought up that God they believe God was black, but I
you.
would
Yeah, so
say
there are
that
people, yeah, you
God
had mentioned,
I wouldn't say God is white
of course
because
not. God
I'm
is
not
not any
supposed to
color.
see. I'm not. Yeah, right.
It's not just
There's
that we
no.
can't see him. The entire concept is
Well,
inapplicable. It's just
right.
absurd. It's
Well,
absurd.
it's giving me an image as well,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and for
If
to
if you're
demand
getting a
that,
if you're
yeah,
giving a describable image of God, it's not
mm,
God. It might
right,
symbolize God, but you should know that the symbol of God is not God. When we write Yud He Wah He, YHWH, on a piece of paper, that does point to God. It's a reference to God, but the writing itself is not God. Heaven forbid. Right? No different when Daniel has a vision of the Ancient of Days. But Daniel knows, unlike other people, Daniel knows that the vision of the Ancient of Days is not literally the one that is symbolizing. It's just a reference, a symbolic reference, right? If God sat on a throne of flames, as it describes, he would fall through it. Right? Flames can't support something. It's all a figure of speech. Uh, yeah, that was just an expounding on your idea that there are some people who say Israel will actually be worshipped, but those are not actual Jews. Those are cults that sprung up with mostly with racist agendas. They're not even trying to understand the Bible as it actually is written.
mm,
All right, so I think we've covered this. Now, the human being or the one like a human being, it's a reference to the people of Israel. Of course, that includes legitimate messiahs, whoever they be, whenever they be, because if it's referring to the people of Israel, that includes our leadership, but it's not an exclusive reference to a messiah. And it absolutely does not mean that there is more than one divinity or worshipful entities in the heavens. God forbid. You know, they also see in visions other angels, other angelic beings. Please don't tell me that you worship them as well just because they're in the heavens. This is a great, great mistake, a horrible mistake, and it has no basis in the Bible. And the only way it could be somehow derived here is by reading into the text something that's not there and completely ignoring the authoritative interpretation that Daniel was given. Right? So that's that. Sha'elah haba'ah. If anybody has any questions about that specifically before we move on, go right ahead. Also, if you want to not juxtapose, if you want to contrast the one like a human being who is symbolizing the people of Israel, often symbolized as a human being in figurative prophetic writings. If you want to say that this is referring to the Messiah, well, then you're saying that the Messiah, who you believe is God, is not the Ancient of Days. That doesn't work with Christianity. Christianity believes that the Messiah is also the Ancient of Days. It is not only the Father who is called the Ancient of Days in establishment Christianity's view of the Trinity, but all three persons of the Trinity are Ancient of Days. So, in the vision, the one who approaches the Ancient of Days, so is that Jesus approaching Jesus? If Jesus is the image of the unseen God, then the Ancient of Days would be Jesus, Hashem Yishmor, God forbid, but it would be the Ancient of Days who is Jesus, who is the anthropomorphization of God, the Father who is the invisible God. And then you still have to ask, who is the Son of Man? It just doesn't work. Any questions? Do you guys understand what I'm saying there? Yeah, so you still have to ask the question. Unless you want to say that Jesus is not the sole image of the unseen God, but also God the Father is the visible image of the unseen God. Right? But that's not even what Christianity traditionally teaches. It's just contradiction upon contradiction.
Salah haba. I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I like to get your input here.
Sure.
Just this week, I wouldn't call it an argument, but we had a disagreement, I guess, because I've been teaching my kids, the commandments. Basically, the command to preserve life is trumps a lot of the other commandments.
All of them except for 3. Yeah.
Except for 3, yes. And then my opposing party came in and says this is incorrect. If you have to lie to save your life, you should rather die than to save your life, because that's breaking a commandment. So my counteract that this is a Christian person, well, I'm like, you're okay lying to your kids about Santa Claus when they're little.
Wow.
Then that means, should you be executed now?
Horrible. Ask them if some intruder has taken them hostage and is asking them where are their children, and it's a pedophile. Are they going to do they think they're sinning by not telling this pedophilic murderer where their children are?
Yeah.
Are they out of their minds?
But anyway, I dropped the conversation because it was getting heated.
Yeah,
But
it's absurd. At some point, you have to realize, like, this is absurd. It's absurd. There is a weighing. There is a need to understand the priorities in the doing of commandments. It's not always clear what commandment takes priority over another, but there are certainly endless scenarios where it is not possible to do all the commandments that you're obligated to do, and you need to make a choice which one will take priority over the other. Right? The commandment to sustain the life of yourself or your fellow most certainly trumps all the other commandments except for murdering someone else, committing forbidden intercourse, or worshiping a false god. Absolutely. And I think that is such a reasonable thing that most people of any religious affiliation, if you sat down and had a calm conversation with them, I think most people would agree that if their child is hiding in a closet from an intruder, and that intruder, you saw him on TV, it's a pedophile who dismembers children while they're alive. I think most normal, sane parents would agree that you would be out of your mind And you would be the most disgusting of parents to tell them, yeah, my child's hiding in that closet. Go do what you want to do with them. Freaking disgusting. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yalla. Sha'ala haba'a.
Thank you.
I'll just make a brief comment just because I'm in a situation where my children also hear contradicting philosophies sometimes, that I take a lot of comfort in knowing that God gave them minds that they can reason with, and
Baruch
that
Hashem, thank God.
they will be able to discern for themselves what is the more logical and rational and
Absolutely.
ethically and morally superior way of looking at the world. So even if they're hearing both, I trust that they will be able to come to the right conclusions on their own.
So there is a passage, I'm going to pull it up in Hebrew. I want us to read this together and memorize it. It's one of the best to have stored away in your memory. So we're going to the book of Proverbs, Mishle. Proverbs is called Mishle in Hebrew. Mishle literally means parables or metaphors, right? It does contain Proverbs. The book of Proverbs does. Yeah, sorry. It's difficult for me to do two things at once. I am not a multitasker. So the book of Proverbs does certainly contain Proverbs, but the word itself literally is metaphors, because it has a lot of metaphors in it. So we are in chapter 21. We're going to verse 30. Okay. En حكماء وإن تبونا وإن عصا لناغذ أذنوي. Let's read this together. Let's read it all together. No wisdom, no prudence, no counsel can prevail against the Lord. I don't like this translation. I guess you could translate it that way, but that's really not what it says. So in Hebrew it says, and by the way means there is not. Okay. And chokhmah, there is no wisdom. And tevuna, you could translate it as prudence. It's normally translated as understanding or reason, right, reasoned comprehension or comprehension of reality of a situation. But en i'sa is good counsel. Usually it's good counsel, especially in the context of Proverbs. It's usually understood as good counsel. One more time. En hukama, there is no wisdom. There is no real comprehension of circumstances. And there is no good counsel that is against the eternal, that is against God. If there is a truly reasonable argument, it will not be against God, right? The question is it intellectually honest? Does it have a good grasp of all the factors at hand? But if it does, it will not be against the Torah. If the Torah is understood not just as being something in the Torah that we don't understand, that makes sense, but if there's something in the Torah that we see legitimately goes against reason, that legitimately goes against reality, then our understanding of the Torah is wrong, right? The cause of reality, the Creator, blessed be He, the Holy One, blessed be He, whose name means absolute reality, the only absolute existence, and can also be read, whose name, most holy name, can also be read as He who causes reality. He will not cause a reality that contradicts His will, that contradicts Himself, right? If something is real, it will not contradict the Lord. It will be in accordance with Him, in accordance with His word. So definitely write this down, but find a better translation than this. En حكماء وإن تبونا وإن عصا لناغذ أذنوي. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for writing. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I won't mention the name. Someone on Facebook is asking,
okay,
what authority gave you the title rabbi?
Let's put this out here first and foremost. I could care less whether somebody calls me rabbi. Could really care less. But if you are in a environment where I'm surrounded by people who are learning from me and they call me rabbi, and someone joins that group and are the only ones not doing so, I would say that they're not only disrespecting me, but they're also disrespecting the students around me. But what the term rabbi never means to me is infallible or unquestionable. However, whether it's me or whether it's anyone else, whether or not they're a rabbi or, just a teacher in Manhattan who has I don't know, a bachelor's degree, she's teaching math. There's a respectful way to ask questions and there's a disrespectful way to ask questions. There's a respectful way to disagree and to formulate your disagreement, and there's a disrespectful way to do it. Just a moment, let me clear my throat. So in the Jewish world, you have, especially in the United States, you predominantly have the Reform Jewish movement and the Conservative Jewish movement, which sometimes get called denominations, but these are organized movements which have formal institutions that give ordination for their communities, right? So these are specific institutions for a very clearly defined denominational affiliation. In the Orthodox world, we don't have that. Our ultimate authority, at least hypothetically, at least as it was historically and should be, is the Great Sanhedrin, the Supreme Council of Scholars of the people of Israel, which no longer exists, unfortunately. So what we have currently is you have several different organizations that may or may not recognize the ordination of each other, right? But you have more than just 5. You have many different rabbinic organizations in the Orthodox world. And hypothetically, what they all have in common is respect and recognition of the authority for the early generations of the Talmudic sages and the Mishnaic sages, respect for their words, and agreement to uphold their unanimous decisions, right? There tends to be variety among different Orthodox groups with regard to uncodified or ununanimous, non-unanimous opinions in the Talmud. That's where you find the more disagreements or variety among traditional Judaism or Jewish groups, and also for situations that arose that they never dealt with, right? So because of that, you have different organizations today giving different ordinations, and one organization may not respect the ordination of another. Generally, they do. Doesn't mean they agree with everything that they're doing, but they will usually give a nod of respect and call someone who's ordained by the Agudat Yisrael organization in the United States. They will call their rabbis rabbi, even if they don't agree with everything that they hold to. And usually rabbis from Agudat Yisrael will call a rabbi who got ordained by a modern Orthodox organization. They'll still call them rabbi, usually, but not always. And so who gave me? I did not receive ordination from a specific widely recognized organization. I did get ordination from an organization I don't want to mention, but if you do a little digging, you can connect the dots. An organization that I feel like doesn't have the best of names, so I prefer to not perpetuate that. But some of the things that I disagree with what that organization does, they were not doing originally, but they started to do that I learned they were doing in more recent times. So I don't want to give them any strength. But I've also been given authority to teach both Jews and non-Jews, authority that I got from more than one of my fellows, more than one of my comrades, you could say, who learned together with me in yeshiva at Midrasha Sephardi in the old city of Jerusalem. So they got their semicha, they got their rabbinic ordination from a very widely recognized institution. And that institution is recognized by the rabbinic court, the High Rabbinic Court of Israel, that they call the Rabbinate in English. And so, although I did not get my ordination directly from the Rabbinate or from Midrash Sephardi, I did get permission to teach Jews and non-Jews with regard to all the basic areas of Jewish law from some of my fellow comrades who studied there with me for many years and who they themselves did get ordination from that community. So I got ordination from them. And that's not an unusual thing in the Orthodox world. There's a plethora of highly esteemed, even highly esteemed rabbis in the Orthodox establishment who got their ordination from individuals rather than modern institutions. So that's that. If you would like their names, I can give you, perhaps, depending on my judging of your intentions, I can give you their names. Sha'elah haba'ah.
Allah haba'ah. What time is it?
It is 12:05.
Okay.
Is it time for a pizza break?
Yeah, something like that.
That's
Heather,
with
you have
Halav
you have
Yisrael pizza cheese. Yeah.
of course, of course. Heather, do you have a closing question?
All right, let's do Tall on Facebook asks, with the options for halakhic prenups for weddings, why has it not become a mandatory part of the Orthodox world to prevent aguna problems and stop injustice towards women?
Well, one of the issues which we just touched on with the Orthodox Jewish world, one of the issues in contrast with Reform and conservative movements is that the Orthodox world is not a monolithic, homogenous community. There are different institutions, and there is not one single highest authority that exists in the present era or that has existed for the last nearly 2,000 years. The only legitimate, truly universal authority that derives directly from God, that exists in classical Judaism, and most Orthodox communities that I'm aware of would readily admit this, is the Great Sanhedrin, which we do not have. We could have, but because of the sins of our leaders and the sins of our masses for not pushing our leaders to reinstate the Great Sanhedrin, so due to these sins, we do not have it. Without such authority, there's no way to mandate, to truly mandate that such prenups would be required in ketubot or in any form before a wedding. That doesn't mean it's not reasonable. It could definitely be reasonable, and I suspect there are such things in certain Orthodox communities, probably in what's called open Orthodoxy or certain other modern Orthodox communities, but there's no way to legitimately enforce it on all communities without the authority of the Great Sanhedrin. That's the answer to that. However, just because there is no Great Sanhedrin, just because there is no universally authoritative Supreme Council of Scholars of Israel currently existing, that doesn't mean you can't do X, Y, Z. It doesn't mean that there is no duty from the dictates of reason for the basic purpose of the function of Jewish leadership. It doesn't mean that there's no duty to do such a thing if it is within reason, if it would facilitate greater observance, greater Torah observance, then it's our duty to do such a thing. The argument has to be made, and the leaders have to be convinced that it is such a duty, right? But it's not a given, right? So that argument has to be made. If they understand it, that it's necessary and to strengthen Torah observance, then it's their duty to institute that for their communities. You can't force it on the entire Jewish world and say, oh, you're a heretic if you aren't doing the same thing. That would be an error. There is a degree of autonomy that traditionally existed in Jewish communities to a degree, so long as it wasn't a matter that the Supreme Council of Israel, the Great Sanhedrin, had not given an authoritative decree regarding, right? So long as that hasn't happened, there is no universal binding requirement other than the dictates of reason. Yes, sir. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
I think
I'll give a few moments for anybody else, our members, any questions about anything we've covered so far. Any topic. It could be about how you close your prayers in Islam to do so according to Jewish law. It could be about how you could best celebrate Easter without violating the Torah. It could be about um, do you prostrate during the Amidah in your local Orthodox synagogue or not? It could be about how do I honor my mother when she doesn't want me to keep Shabbat? Any question?
What is a legal sukkah?
Oh boy. You know, this one I think we should keep until we're closer to Sukkot.
Yep, I agree.
But that
Yeah.
would be a sukkah, a structure that is in accordance with the at least the bare bones guidelines of our sages. That's the short answer. All right, so in that case, if nobody has any question, then I do want us to do this real fast. So it is the new month. I can pull it up in English. So everyone remember, in addition to having short additions that we add to our daily prayers on the day of the new moon itself, we also have this blessing that you could say up into the midpoint of the month, but you should say as soon as you see the reappearance of the moon. So we're going to read this right now real fast just to help ingrain it in your minds, but do not think that our reading it at this moment is fulfilling the duty. This is for educational purposes only. Heather, would you like to read it? So this,
Yes.
you would see when you see the crescent of the new moon, and you should say this blessing. You don't need a minyan or anything like that.
Worshipful are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who by his utterance created the heights of the heavens and all their hosts with the breath of his mouth. He gave them a fixed law and schedule, that their tasks not be changed. They are happy and rejoice to do the will of their possessor, trustworthy doers of truth. And he said to the moon, Be renewed as a diadem of splendor to those born of the womb, that in the future they shall likewise be renewed to glorify their Maker of the glory of his dominion. Worshipful are you, O Lord, renewer of months.
All right, beautiful. Continue. Oh yeah, it just popped in my head another thing about the Daniel chapter 7 passage and the so-called two powers idea, that it says that dominion was given to that individual, right? Which we know as the people of Israel, the righteous of Israel. Oh, it's not in here. So you have to ask the question. That passage, if you think it's referring to Jesus in the context of establishment Christianity's beliefs regarding the Trinity, you have to ask the question, if Jesus was already God, then the whole earth was already his. So how was he given dominion if he already had it? Because it is the Ancient of Days who gave him that dominion, meaning the Ancient of Days already had that dominion. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. It always has been from the beginning. So that dominion is being given to one who did not yet have that dominion, right? So essentially, it's saying that whoever is receiving that dominion did not have it yet. And if Jesus were God, Hashem Yishmor, Has v'shalom, if Jesus were God and he were always God, then he would have already had that dominion. That is basically the actual meaning of the word God or Elohim in Hebrew. It is the powerful authority. So, so like, how are you being given something that you already had? You know what I'm saying? Okay, let's keep going. Who would like to read? This is the prayer giving thanks to God for the opportunity to learn his word and saving us from those who go astray.
Gur
Niha.
Sheli.
Bachavod.
Mode Ani Lifanecha Adonai Elohai.
I'm grateful before you, O eternal, my God, my powerful authority. Keep going, Habibi.
Shasamta.
Always assume the Shava is a silent Shava. That means the consonant is pronounced, but without being immediately followed by a vowel. Assume it unless you know otherwise.
It's the first letter that I always.
Het. Het. It makes a ha sound. In popular pronunciation, but if it's better, it is better to pronounce it as an H rather than as a ha.
Yeah.
Unless it's at the end of a word. Go ahead.
Halki.
All right, halqi. Hal is actually Yemenite pronunciation. More standard would be halqi.
Mil.
Me.
Me.
So a yud, anytime you have a vowel above, below a yud, if a yud has a vowel associated with it, which it does here, this O vowel belongs to the yud. So anytime a yud has a vowel above or below it, or if you don't see that, but you do see there's a dot in the yud, in any of those cases, you can be 100% sure that the yud should be pronounced as a consonantal Y, like in the word yes, and not merely as an E sound. Okay, so you guys write that down if you did not know it. Anytime yud has a vowel that belongs to it, or a dot inside of it, you can know with 100% certainty it should be pronounced as a Y, like yes, as a consonant Y, and not simply as an E sound.
And is there a typo on the sheen?
Yes and no. In some printed editions, and I could have added it here, but in some printed editions, you should be aware that if a sheen is preceded by a holam, that the dot will be missing, that you're to understand the dual purpose of the dot of the holam is indicating a sheen. That does occur on occasion. But if it had this much space, I should add it.
Mi yoshva.
Right?
Mi yoshve.
Yes, perfect.
Beit ha midrash.
All right, Beth Midrash. All right, so we are grateful before you, O eternal our God, that you have placed our portion among those who dwell in your house of study. Nihaba. Who's next? Nihaba.
Nihaba.
Bachavod.
Lo Shamta.
Right, Sam.
Oh, Samta. Lo Samta. Eloki. Mish. Miv.
Miyo.
Miyoshve. Keronot.
Beautiful. And you have not placed my portion among those who dwell on street corners. Dwell idly is the connotation. You can keep going. Bachavod.
She'ani. Oh, yeah. She'ani. Mishbim.
Right, this vowel.
Mashbim.
Mashkim. If this were
mashkim.
This does look like a bet. The difference is a bet has a little tail at the bottom pointing to the right.
You're right. Mishkim.
Bet. Go ahead.
Mishkim. Vechem. Mishkibim. Bishkimim.
Ma. So if you see the line, you got to open up your mouth for this vowel. In fact, the name of this vowel. In fact, the name of this vowel is patah. Patah. The names of the vowels mean something. Okay. The names of the vowels mean something. It's called patah because you open your mouth. The word patah, the name of it, means open.
Okay.
You want to open your mouth.
Mashkimim.
Yes, sir.
Mashkimim.
Yes, sir. The only other thing is with the letter hey, we always want to be careful to completely relax our throat muscles. There should be no friction when we make the sound of hey. So it's the
Never
letter.
relax, you know.
The what? You're never relaxed?
I've never relaxed.
All right, wehem mashkimim. All right, so I get up early. Ani mashkim. Wehem mashkimim, and they get up early. Go ahead and read to this point as well.
Okay. Ani mashkim לדברי תורה.
Div.
Oh, b'div berei Torah.
All right, let's slow down. So go ahead and translate.
Um, ani for we get up for I guess for I was it get up early
Yes, so I get up early.
to the words of the to study or to the words of the
to
Torah.
the words of Torah. That's right.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead and read in Hebrew.
The hem.
All right, relax that throat. You gotta relax.
The hem.
This is important. It'll be
Yeah.
bad Hebrew if you don't.
Yeah, no, I get it. I
And
need to practice that.
by the way, if it's really too difficult, because I understand, if it's too difficult, it's actually better to not pronounce the hey at all than to pronounce it as a cha or a cha. It's better to just not pronounce it at all than to pronounce it with friction. In modern Hebrew, most of the younger generation do not pronounce hey at all. They just read the vowel under it. And you won't sound weird if you do that. You'll sound very normal. But if you do cha, the what? Go ahead.
So say like the M?
That would be way better than saying wachem. Would be way better.
Oh, I guess you pronounce the vav as a wa, right?
Well, in modern Hebrew, they do as a V. I'm just talking about the letter hey right now.
Okay.
All right. But I know you can pronounce it correctly. So it's really, if anybody can pronounce it correctly, it's just better to get in the habit of it.
Yeah.
Yallah. Let's keep going. Yallah.
Ba'em mashkimim. Live devarim.
Okay, so Shava, which is the Shava is the colon looking. It's so Shava. Hold on a second. I want someone to tell us if we are not sure whether Shava should be sounded or silent. What should you assume? There are two main types of Shava. There's a sounded Shava, which means you would pronounce the Shava as a short vowel following the consonant that's under. That's a sounded Shava. Then you have a silent Shava, which is a Shava that does not represent a vowel sound. Instead, a silent Shava. Hold on a second. Instead, a silent Shava means that the letter it's under is the last sound of the syllable that was just given. Right? So if you're not sure which one it should be, what should you assume?
That is sounded.
Silent.
Silent.
Okay. Always assume it's silent. Right? I want you guys to write that down if you did not know it. It may in fact be a sounded Shava, but if you're going to make a mistake, it's better to mistake it as a silent one than to mistake it as a sounded one. The reason is because that is a common mistake in modern Hebrew, that they will make silent sounded Shavas, that they will pronounce it as silent. So it's better to make that mistake because it's a quote-unquote accepted mistake. It's widespread. In modern Hebrew, with actual Hebrew speakers, they do not frequently make a mistake of sounding a silent Shava. So that means if you do that mistake, it sounds more weird.
So in this case, it will be liv varim.
That's right. Liv varim. That's right.
Okay. Liv varim vetalim.
Beautiful. All right. You can read this. Hem is they. Go ahead.
They get up early. Empty words or something like
that. That's right. Yeah. Matters. It can mean words or matters. It really means matters here.
Okay, things. To matters.
Empty things. Yeah.
Okay.
Mi haba. Kol hakavod. I know that was a little bit of a mouthful. Mi haba. Who's next?
אני הבאה.
בכבוד.
אני עמל והם עמלים.
Okay. So, ani.
I
I hear some hesitation in voice.
That's because I don't remember what amel is.
Just think of an email. Sending emails is a lot of work, right? If you think of emails at your job,
And I
use
work.
it. Yeah, so and I work, but think of it as a lot of work. This is not the normal word for work. This is toil. This is hard work.
Okay. So
I
I
work
work hard and they work hard.
That's it. أني عمل وهم عملين. All right, you want to continue?
Yeah.
بخل.
And אני עמל ומקבל.
Hold on, what do we say about the shava? If we're not sure whether it's sounded or silent, what should we assume?
That it's silent.
That's right.
ומקבל sahar.
Right? Sachar. This needs friction.
Sahar.
There you go. So I work hard. I'm sorry, you translate it. أني عمل مقابل سخار.
I work hard and receive reward.
Beautiful. This word مقابل means receiving. Okay, and it's the root word is kabbalah, which literally means that which is received. Same root word. Kabbalah, kabel. Any word you see with a kuf bet lamed almost certainly will mean something about receiving. Sahar is reward, probably the same root that you get the Arabic and Indian Urdu words for thank you. Got a lot.
وهم عملين وإن مقابلين. Sahar.
Very good. Now here you pronounce the shava. I didn't say anything because you should. You should pronounce shava as a short e if it's under the very first letter in a word. And you should pronounce the shava, you should pronounce it as a short e if it is under a letter that has a dagesh. You guys, write that down if you did not know it.
And they work hard and do not receive reward.
Yafeh, haval al azman. All right. Mi haba, who's next? Please do not be ashamed. En habaishan nomed. One who's too timid will not learn. Notice I put everybody in the hot seat. Everybody got corrected, so it's not unusual. And if you're not up to task for reading a full phrase, feel free to just read one letter. Just tell me the name of each letter. I will help you if you don't know, but let's try.
אני הבאה. I can read the next part.
All right. בכבוד.
אני רץ והם רצים.
All right, and beautiful hey you did there. So no excuses. You got it.
I know.
You did great.
Is it I ran and they run? Is that what
That's
it
exactly it. That's exactly it.
is? Okay.
Very good. Kol hakavod. You want to continue?
Good.
בכבוד.
But-
Just do up to here. I want Victor to do the last part.
Okay. אני רץ לחיי העולם העולם הבא.
Often that hey.
העולם הבא.
That's it. Yes, perfect. Right? Tetargem means translate. Tetargem.
Okay.
Tetargem. בבקשה.
Again. I run. Oh, I forgot that word.
Who can help us? מה זה le? What is le?
Oh, lechaye.
What does le mean? If anyone wants to suggest. So le is
I
a
ran I ran to life.
good.
the
Le
world
is
to
a common
come.
prefix that means to or for, right? Yeah, and haye means life of. Go ahead.
Life of, yeah, to the world to come.
Yeah, so I run into the life of the world to come. Victor, tur shelcha. Excuse me.
Wahem? Ratzin? Ratz.
That's right. Trust me, I'll stop you if it's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Leave air.
Beautiful articulation of that aleph. You want to say it again?
Leave air.
Beautiful. You guys be careful not to blend syllables. If you have a silent shava and then you have an aleph, anytime you have aleph with a vowel, it should be its own syllable. A lot of people would blend these syllables and say liver, giving the bet or the vet to the next syllable when it's clearly belonging to the previous syllable. So kudos to Mr. Victor. Liver.
Shachat.
Right? If we said shahat, it would be like there being a shava under here. Shahat. Shava, the colon-looking symbol, indicates unaccented vowel. So if we said shahat, that would be putting a shava here. Instead, what should...
Tuna, you want to
Shahat.
go ride bikes?
Whoops.
Go ahead. What'd you say?
Shahat.
I think Emmanuel. What'd you say, Emmanuel?
Oh, it was unmuted accidentally. I just.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
Yalla.
It's okay.
All right, titar again. Titar again. Go ahead and translate.
Oh. Mm. I'm
All right, so hen and the wall or the vav means and. Hen is they. Right?
and
Hen
they, I
rhymes with,
see.
yeah, hem rhymes with the English translation. Them. Him and them.
I seem to recall ruts meaning running or
That's it. Yes, that's it.
Mhm.
It's just a plural form of rats. It's plural because hem is plural. So and they,
and they run. Uh, little help.
the lamed is the same as here. It's a frequent prefix. Usually means two or four. Almost always means either two or four. F-O-R. So and they run, leave to. This is related to the name of a well-known city, Be'er-Sheva. Beersheba, Beersheba.
Mhm.
So what is Be'er? Why is Beersheba? Why is it, it's really Sheva. Why is it called Be'er or Be'er? Be'er-Sheva. It's the same
I
word.
don't know.
All right. So there were wells, pits, right? So Be'er is a pit. I remember Abraham dug wells, right? So Liber. So they're running to a pit.
Into a pit of
Ah,
destruction.
yes, of destruction.
Hmm.
All right. Heather, would you like to lead us in a short prayer of thanks to God for our time and for this week and this new month? Be'ezrat Hashem.
We thank you for this wonderful time of study together and for so many wonderful questions that we can learn so much from the questions that others have in addition to our own. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Can you hear us on? As Moses said, El na rafa'na Allah. Don't be afraid to make a short prayer. Sometimes, what do they say? There's beauty in brevity, or kol hamosif gorea, which means the more one adds, the more they remove from something. Sometimes it's nice. There's nothing wrong with a nice, short and sweet prayer.
Moses said that?
El na rafa'na Allah. Yeah.
Ah.
He didn't say all who add remove, although he did kind of say that in a roundabout way. But Moses
it was
did
expounded later, but yeah.
Yeah, but Moses did say for praying for healing, he said, God, please heal her now. And that was the extent of his prayer. I think that was with regard to Miriam, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
All right. All right, you guys, if you have any questions about anything covered today or any other topics, please feel free to write them under this video as it will be posted to YouTube or Facebook or in our groups, whether in WhatsApp or on Telegram.
Or on Mishnah Walk.
On the mishnahwalk.com. That's right. So on that note, everybody have a wonderful week. A good new month.
Mato.
Don't forget to say that blessing, Birkat Alavana, the blessing over the sighting of the new moon. Lama an Shemo, for the sake of his name.